What is going on, everybody, and welcome to CTW Live. I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo. Alongside of me today, Rob Haytayan and Nick Franco. And, of course, as you guys see on the top of the screen here, Jrue Holiday, a huge topic upcoming this summer for the Boston Celtics. In 24-25, Jrue Holiday took a little bit of a step back, and ever since, all we've had to talk about with Jrue Holiday has been trade rumors. The rumor mill has been running this summer so far. A lot of rumors to get to in this one. However, Jrue Holiday, we've pinpointed him as a name over time that could be moved in the future for the Celtics. However, that date seems to be getting closer to us. However, as we get into this live here, looking at the whole Jrue Holiday situation, what are your guys' initial thoughts on Jrue Holiday and where he stands with the Boston Celtics going into this summer?
It's a good question. It's an interesting one because Jrue is probably I saw so in the podcast yesterday I said that right now I view the Celtics big three, right? It's Porzingis, it's Holiday, it's Hauser, right? It's their offseason big three. It's the three biggest names to watch. It's probably the three guys that Boston's phoning calls for daily and really trying to move off of to get out of that second apron. Holiday out of those three, in my eyes, is probably the most appealing in terms of teams willing to give up a decent package to acquire. Hauser's a guy that I think you move up in the draft with. I think there's a path there. Porzingis, I think it's up in the air, but Holiday, who we're focusing in on today, I think it's a unique route where you can use Holiday. I know we were going to talk about a lot of different teams. The Kings, the Lakers are two that I look at as, you know, you got to use Jrue Holiday as leverage with an older team, right? And you got to convince an older team that Jrue Holiday is that missing piece to take you to the finals, right? And I think that's your path with Jrue. If you can do that, if you can use Jrue Holiday like that, like a tool and acquire some young depth, I think you're doing the right thing with Jrue. I expect Jrue to be traded. Again, there's worlds where that doesn't happen. We're going to talk about that, I'm sure. But overall, I think Jrue Holiday is the most glamorous piece Boston has to offer out of those three. And I expect a move to be made where, well, I don't know. That's for us to talk about, right?
Exactly.
I think the West is going to be clamoring for talent. I think looking over at the Eastern Conference, you're seeing a lot of teams going to start to leverage out and utilize the younger players in the league and look towards developing, because that's right now is the path of teams that you've been seeing find success in the NBA right now. The Indiana Pacers is a well-developed team that made a few moves to add to their core players. You look at the Celtics; they were a team that stuck to their main players and really developed them. And over on the Western Conference side of things, you're looking at a very, very competitive race over there going into next season. Even if you look at the teams that were in the play-in tournament and even below, even the San Antonio Spurs, they're going to be looking to make moves, and it's going to be a very talented Western Conference next year, and a lot of moves are going to be trending that way. Who knows? Possibly Giannis might be moving out west. You might see the Houston Rockets add a key player like Kevin Durant, or make a final piece acquisition to really bolster their team and get that one player that is going to bring them to a different level. So there's definitely a market for players like Jrue Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, and Sam Hauser, because of one distinct thing that we've seen transfer over in trades is championship DNA has value as a trade asset. If you look at a player that has won a championship before and you're a young team that's trying to get to that level, get over the hump, you're looking at these guys who have done it before to go into your locker room and be able to help lead that team and be a contributor. Sure, we've seen better days out of Jrue Holiday, and he's one of those players that the IQ and skill level really outmatches the athleticism as that deteriorates, but he's still a valuable piece to a team, and he can still contribute on both sides of the ball. And if the Celtics were to bridge over with Jrue Holiday, his contract is one that you can still get under the second apron with, and we'll get into that later on in the show as we talk about the financial side of things, because that's going to be the primary focus for the Celtics this season, is really looking at the finances and determining where your money is valuable and where your money is not, and being prepared to guide this team throughout the next ownership, which is Bill Chisholm. So that's where a lot of my is to the conversation of getting under that second apron. I think that you're going to see this team kind of go for a rebranding of a sort when it comes to a roster, and it's going to be a lot more depth. And the injury of Jason Tatum, it really changes a lot of that, because if Tatum was healthy heading into next year, you could make a very solid argument to keep this team as a whole and hope that they can bounce back in next year and roll with the core five that you're starting with. But now with Tatum out next year, it's looking more and more like a bridge year. And what talent and can you add to your team, and what depth can you add to your team to get yourself to make it to the playoffs and be at a competitive level?
Just one more
Go ahead,
thing.
Rob.
Sorry, Seamus. One more thing I want to add on terms of Jrue Holiday in trading him. I do think it's worth looking into the lottery. I'm going to be a broken record about this in terms of using these three players to get into the draft. You see in the top, in the top 14, right, in that lottery position, I do feel like there are suitors for Holiday, teams that would be willing to listen. I think San Antonio at 14 could listen, Houston at 10. I believe Toronto, even at 9, I think you could see a world where Toronto listens. So I do believe there's ways to use Jrue in the draft scenes too. I would really like to see that, because you're cutting costs while bringing in young talent that's cheaper. So just another, another aspect I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about, but I'm going to be a broken record about that, guys, until draft night's over, using these guys to try to trade up.
Yeah, and certainly so. And you see the Celtics, you talk about the draft lottery, but just in general, the Celtics, this main live right here is about this rumor. Celtics listening in on calls for Jrue Holiday. Boston is most definitely listening in on calls for Jrue Holiday, sources say. And that's from Mark Stein via Hoops Hype here. So that's secondary source, but the primary source of Mark Stein, this is where it comes from. The Celtics are certainly going to listen to calls on Jrue Holiday for this summer, during this summer. And Franco, you mentioned it, contenders. Can the Celtics convince contenders that Jrue Holiday is that missing piece? And Rob, you mentioned that, but Jrue Holiday to draw interest from contenders, according to this report by the New York Times, though Holiday dealt with lingering issues throughout the regular season, his reputation as a known winner and top defender should interest several contending teams if the Celtics do not look to move, or if do look to move him, do look to move Jrue Holiday, that is, according to league sources, again, via New York Times. That's how that one reads. So the Celtics certainly they're already listening to calls on Jrue Holiday, but some of those teams, it's likely that there could be contenders listening for Jrue, and Rob, you even mentioned it. There could be lottery teams listening to Jrue, listening to, or at least pursuing Jrue this season, or rather this offseason. But this next rumor here had a little bit of a technical difficulty behind the scenes. Celtics want a first rounder for Jrue Holiday. Hoops Hype reporting this via the New York Post. A first round pick could be the price to acquire Jrue Holiday from the Celtics, according to this report. The veteran point guard has been in the middle of trade rumors recently, and the team's front office is looking for a first rounder in return, plus whatever reduced salary comes back in the deal, per Hardwood. If somebody want to paroxysm, I've never, this is the first time
I'm the
I'm
wrong
on a
guy.
stream here. I'm like, wait a minute, I've read this word a million times.
Paroxysm.
Hardwood
I'm the wrong guy
paroxysm.
here. This is
Here we
not
go. Okay,
I got
paroxysm. No, I got to the word and I was like, oh man, cliffhanger. Like, whoa, now, whoa. It's like I've read this a million times, but I've never actually had to speak out loud and say something about it. So that report there, everybody saw it on screen, but if you're listening to this, hardwood paroxysm, that report comes from. out there on Jrue Holiday. But ultimately, why the Celtics would move Jrue Holiday this summer, to me, is pretty simple. It's very simple when looking at all the reasons. Number one, Jrue Holiday regressed in 24-25 compared to the 23-24 season in which the Celtics won the championship. Jrue Holiday came out last season in 24-25 and simply regressed across the board. He notched his lowest point per game total since his rookie year last season. His field goal percentage dropped by 3.7%. His point per game average dropped by 1.4 points per game. His rebounds per game dropped by 1.1 rebounds per game. His assists per game dropped by 0.9 assists per game. And his blocks per game, it was down 50%, 0.8 to 0.4 last season. And in terms of his minutes per game played dropped by 2.2 minutes per game, and that was Jrue Holiday's lowest since the 2015-16 season, which was nearly a decade ago. Now a decade ago, going into next season. So number one, Jrue Holiday regressed last season in 24-25. That's just a simple fact. When a player at the age in which Jrue Holiday is at right now, in his mid-30s, when you see that steep regression, especially with a guard, in the mid 30s, right? A guard in his mid 30s, when you see that steep progression, or rather regression, that's a sign this likely isn't getting better. Jrue Holiday next season likely isn't getting any better from what he was last season. And last season, the Celtics put him on ice. And you talk about the regression within Jrue Holiday's game. What need be mentioned is his guaranteed future money. And we've talked about this endless times with Jrue Holiday. It's the first thing that always comes up within the conversation of the Celtics trading Jrue Holiday. 3 seasons from now, in 27-28, Jrue Holiday will be making $37.2 million. We're already talking about regression going into next season, in which next season Jrue Holiday is owed $32.4 million. But 3 seasons from now, Jrue Holiday, during, I believe, his age 37, 38 season, he'll be owed $37.2 million. And the future money, if you're talking about regression now, if we're talking about regression now within Jrue Holiday, what is that going to look like when the Celtics are paying him $37 million later on down the line within their books if he's already regressing 3 years before that point? That's a huge, it's almost reminiscent of Kemba Walker in a way. That's a huge talking point when it comes to Jrue Holiday. Kemba Walker, a little similar, a little different though. Kemba Walker, multiple meniscus surgeries, multiple knee surgeries before joining the Boston Celtics in 2019, and then eventually just fell off a cliff in 2021. Jrue Holiday hasn't necessarily seen that same progression within his Celtics career. He hasn't necessarily fallen off a cliff. Yes, he's regressed, but it wasn't quite like Kemba. Kemba went from productive to couldn't play. I mean, straight up couldn't play, just could not play defense, couldn't be out there on the floor consistently. And there was a much steeper decline with Kemba, but it's still very reminiscent because the Celtics, after their first 2 seasons with Kemba, still owed him $37 million, ironically the same number, 2 seasons from when Kemba was already regressing. So Jrue Holiday's situation, a little reminiscent of the Kemba Walker situation, knowing Jrue Holiday regressed last year and that he's paid $37 million later on down the line in 27-28. Furthermore, however, the reasons in which Jrue Holiday could also be on the move, looking at it from a Celtics perspective, look at the competitive stage of the Celtics right now and look at their luxury tax number. Look at the general salary number the Celtics own right now. They're $20 million over the second apron without making a move this summer. The Celtics have not made a move. They're Al Horford, a free agent, Luke Cornett, a free agent. The Celtics haven't made a move, period, on their roster. And as of right now, if they do not re-sign anybody, they're going to be losing their second and third big man. And they're still $20 million over the second apron within the luxury tax. If you look at Jrue Holiday's contract, his future, his age, and the Celtics' competitive stage, and Franco, you mentioned it, it's one of the biggest points. Jason Tatum tearing his Achilles. Jason Tatum tearing his Achilles changed this entire summer for the Celtics because ultimately, Jason Tatum, if he's healthy next season, there is way more of there's a way larger argument for Jrue Holiday staying within the confines of the Boston Celtics and potentially playing on the parquet next year alongside Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and the team tries to regroup and run it back for another championship run. Now with Jason Tatum out of the lineup, is there more incentive? And the answer really is yes on this. There is more incentive for the Celtics to move a 35-year-old player who, when Jason Tatum comes back, he'll be upwards of nearly 37 years old. So, just looking at the competitive state of the Celtics might not be all that competitive next year. And Jrue Holiday, how many competitive years does Jrue Holiday actually have left? Right now, Jrue Holiday, his age, let's get the age right here. Oh, his birthday was yesterday. It was June 12th. It was
Yep.
yesterday. He turned 35 yesterday. So just talking about the ages, we got the 35 by one day, but he's going to be 35 going into next season. And when Jason Tatum comes back, he's going to be 36. So how many more years does Jrue Holiday actually have as a legitimate competitor in the NBA at his elite status, especially defensively of where he is right now? How many more years does he actually have? If the Celtics aren't competitive next year, that actually might become an internal personal thing with Jrue Holiday over time going, especially if the Celtics were to hold on to him towards the trade deadline and the Celtics, maybe the season's going a little awry. That could be something personal within Jrue Holiday that comes out over time. Jrue Holiday may say, I kind of want to go to a situation in which I feel like I can win. Now, I will say, with that being said, Jrue Holiday does want to remain with the Boston Celtics per this report. Jrue Holiday, per Jay King, Jrue Holiday said he wants to stay with the Celtics and believes their championship window remains open. Stressed how much talent they have, not just on the roster, but on the coaching staff and all the way up to Brad Stevens. So as of right now, Jrue Holiday, I will say, do have this report out there that Jrue Holiday wants to stay with the Boston Celtics, but I wouldn't rule out if the Celtics do maintain Jrue Holiday and they retain Jrue Holiday on the roster going ahead towards the trade deadline in the summer, or not the summer, the winter. Under those circumstances, I could see maybe the Celtics, maybe they don't have the best of seasons. Jrue Holiday is 35 years old. Maybe his opinion changes a little bit into, I want to be in a winning situation. That's certainly possible later on down the line. And just from a Celtics perspective, it's possible the Celtics see the outcome with Jrue in the future, knowing, okay, $37 million, 36 years old next season when Tatum actually comes. Not next season, he'll be 35 next season, but the season after next, talking about the Friday movies. I mean, Friday, you got Friday, next Friday, Friday after next. The same thing here. That's how we have to talk about Jason Tatum and when he's coming back. It's like the season after next. But ultimately, Jrue Holiday will be 36 years old when Jason Tatum comes back in the lineup. And how effective will he be? So there's that on the table with Jrue Holiday. And the Celtics can still acquire a valuable player with a 10 to, I say the range is about 10 to 25 million dollars. The Celtics can acquire a 10 to 25 million dollar player, which is a still valuable player out there in the NBA. If the Celtics can still acquire that range of a player, they're still cutting money from their books next season, which is the ultimate goal of the Celtics this summer. It's basically to stay competitive while also cutting tax elsewhere. And simply put, too, this could be Jrue Holiday's highest point of value going ahead. I mean, you look at it, like he could be in a season from now. We're talking about, oh, could we get PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford? Can we get Rob? You're talking about, can we move into the lottery with Jrue Holiday next season? Those conversations might be off the table. I mean, look at Jimmy Butler. Look at Jimmy Butler over the course of the 2024 summer. Jimmy Butler. Oh, Amin Thompson, Tara Eason, multiple first-round picks from the Rockets for Jimmy Butler. And obviously the Rockets were very reluctant to talk in those deals. However, the conversation was about multiple first and young players for Jimmy Butler. Then it turned into Andrew Wiggins, one first-round pick, Dennis Schroeder, it was Kyle Anderson. Josh Richardson's moved away from the Heat. I had to mention him in there. But that deal, you look at how the value of Jimmy Butler progressed, potentially, maybe with Jrue Holiday, that could happen. We already saw regression last season. It's possible that regression continues into the future. And looking at the whole situation from that perspective, it's possible Jrue Holiday's value drops even further from where it is right now. Because I would argue, if you tried to trade Jrue Holiday last summer, giving him the extension. I mean,
You
I mean,
could
it wasn't
have gotten a lot.
Yeah.
right.
Well,
And
I
I
also
don't think they were eligible to trade him last summer because they
No.
gave him the extension. But,
Yeah.
just a hypothetical, if they were to move Jrue last summer, he's probably moved at a higher value than he is right now. I mean,
I do.
that's fair.
No, I agree. I so agree. I do. But I also like the thing with Jrue Holiday is a player like Kristaps, for example, right? I genuinely do believe Kristaps Porzingis holds negative value in the market. I don't know if Boston's going to be able to get rid of Kristaps Porzingis, right? I think that his injury history, his track record there is so bad. Like, I think a player like KP is truly unmovable. I think a player like Jrue is actually really, really appealing to a bunch of. I think there are a bunch of teams who are out there or are looking at Jrue Holiday thinking, okay, our window's 2 to 3 years. Jrue can contribute for 2 of them, right? Like, I think you look at teams like Golden State, like Houston, like Dallas, like LA, like Sacramento, who truly believe that Jrue Holiday takes them to that, even like a team like Sacramento, right? Sacramento, I think they're a little delusional here, but I'll like to play into their delusions a little bit, maybe get some value back from them. Sacramento is probably thinking bringing Jrue Holiday in, right, takes them from about like the 10, 9, 8, 7, like that play-in area to like 3, 4, 5, right? They probably think if we bring in Jrue Holiday, he elevates us to the upper echelon of the West. Probably not. But I listen, I truly believe Jrue Holiday can contribute still. I believe that last season he had his moments. I think he was underutilized, quite frankly, within the Celtics offense. He still managed to shoot 35% from behind the arc, which is like not that bad and pretty like Jrue Holiday in my eyes, he's still a high-end defender. Offensively, did he take a step back with Boston? Yes. Is there upside with Holiday on the offensive end of the floor? There is. So for me, I think the key with Jrue is, Seamus, I agree with you. So right now, Jrue Holiday's value every day, it gets lower, right? Like literally, like right now is a little bit higher than it's going to be tomorrow, which is a little bit higher than it's going to be next day. Like
today's price is not today's price.
Right, exactly. The market on Jrue really, it might be very steady right now. Off season, your stock can't drop that much, right? But like it's steadily going down. So you look at them, right? And I kind of wanted to ask you guys this. So and this ties in with Jrue. Like, is there a world? Do we like? For me, Jrue doesn't necessarily need to be moved, but he should be, right? Like the way I look at it is like, okay, Jrue Holiday, if you don't move him, Seamus, you just mentioned it. Are you going to be able to get anything of value? Like, yeah, does he maybe give you 4 extra wins next year? But it's like, is it worth it to hold on? You know what I'm saying? Like, in my head, it's now or never with Jrue because just you're 36 next year. Like, you're not going to get much back for it.
No, 100%. I mean, this is the window. It's the shitter get off the pot window for the Celtics right now with Jrue Holiday,
Right.
because it's for all the reasons we're talking about right now. And next season, you might not be able to get more out of Holiday, and even more so, it's the fact that Jrue Holiday, like the glaring thing to me here is he regressed last season, and it was very evident early on in the season. And talk about the 3-point percentage. It shows how elite of a 3-point shooter he was in 2023, 24. Robbie mentioned he still shot 35% from 3 last season. It was a 7.7% drop in 3-point percentage from 24 to 25. That's significant. Now, it does show, again, the elite shooting of Jrue Holiday in 24 to drop 7 percentage points, nearly 8 percentage points, and still come out with a league average 3-point percentage, or at least close to it. It's a little below league average, which is a problem because he was way above league average in 24, then he was a little below average in 25. But that's the glaring thing to me here is the fact he regressed last year, and he's a guard in his mid 30s, which we always see with guards in their mid 30s. I mean, how many guards have really been able to sustain themselves?
Curry.
It's been Curry and Chris Paul. Like Chris Paul,
yeah.
I mean, there's really not many examples
Mike
of guards. Mike Conley, yes. No, but I could see Jrue being somebody who makes it into his later stages of his career.
I agree.
I wouldn't be surprised if he was a Conley type later on in time. The only problem is he's making $37 million 2 seasons from now, and we're talking
right.
We're talking like, even if he does make it farther into his back half of his 30s, if he makes it further into his back half of his 30s, it's possible he's not worth $37 million later. Like he could be worth
Well,
10 million.
you know
He
where
could be worth 15, but 37, that's a lot for Jrue Holiday at age 37.
you know where that's worth it though. It's those teams that aren't paying their stars yet, right? Those teams those young assets, right? Where they're like for example, Houston, right? Houston, I believe, is paying Van Vliet, and then Sengun and Green, like their extensions have yet to kick in, right? So it's like, okay, right now we can eat 2 years of Jrue Holiday, paying him 37, right? Like you got to find those teams. Like Oklahoma City is another example, right? Although after the season they're out of that category, but like young teams that aren't paying their young players yet, but are like Orlando would be a great example of that, right? Orlando's not paying any of their young guys yet, right? You send Holiday over there, they can eat Holiday for 2 years, right? Although I do believe the Paulo extension is about to kick in. But like, there is a window there. I think those are the teams to attack also, right? There's like two teams. The upper echelon Lakers and Warriors, where they're older, right? They have their 2-year window, Mavericks, and then those younger teams who are like, okay, Holiday's a vet. He's pairing with the young players, and we have space to bring on Jrue for 2 years. So that's the in my eyes, the two tiers of teams that can do it.
Well, I want to mention too with all this, you mentioned, teams who haven't paid their young guys yet. I'll also add on to that teams that don't necessarily have that second tier of contracts. Like they might have max guys, but then they have a bunch of $2 million guys, or like
Right.
they might have a couple $10 million guys, but no guys within the range of $20 to $30 million. And one of those teams I'm going to pinpoint, the Dallas Mavericks. And we showed this on the Celtics Nation Rise podcast a couple of weeks ago. However, we're going to bring it up again because the Mavericks, they seem to be a legitimate trade suitor for Jrue Holiday. And this rumor comes from Hoops Hype via Mark Stein. And this is how it reads. League sources say Dallas is expected to at least explore whether there are any feasible trade pathways to Boston's Jrue Holiday. Complicated as that would be, likely given the 3 years and $104 million still left on Holiday's contract, while also maintaining an interest as far as reasonable trade target, as we've discussed on the DLLS Mavs podcast. Lonzo Ball, another name to monitor for Dallas, Chris Paul. So I want to point out within this rumor, the Dallas Mavericks, the reason they're such a suitor for Jrue Holiday, they don't have any guards. They simply have no guards. Kyrie Irving, he's under contract technically, but he owns a $44 million player option this summer. After Kyrie Irving, the only two guards on the roster, Jaden Hardy and Brandon Williams. And Brandon Williams was a two-way guy signed at the end of last season. Showed some promise, no doubt, for the Mavericks, but probably not relying on him to take over the rotation, especially with Cooper Flag coming into the mix with the Dallas Mavericks. And then looking at the free agency sheet with Dallas, Spencer Dinwiddie likely to depart, Dante Exum maybe so as well. Both of those guys, they could be back in Dallas, but it's also possible they both exit the facility in Dallas. And Dallas, under those circumstances, they're only left with Kyrie, Jaden Hardy, and Brandon Williams. And even Kyrie, there's a scenario where maybe Kyrie finds more money elsewhere outside of Dallas. I'm anticipating that Kyrie opts out of his player option, signs back with the Mavericks for a longer term with more money guaranteed in the future. That's the likely route with Kyrie Irving, no matter where he goes. But I would say that's the most likely destination for Kyrie this summer is Dallas, and it's staying in Dallas. That's the most likely scenario in my mind with Kyrie, but still with
You're not going
Kyrie
to trade
back on the
for him?
lineup. No. Well, first of all, I mean, if he messes with that player option, now the only way it could be traded is if he opts out of the player, or no, he opts into the player option, and then the Mavericks trade away his deal. But otherwise, if he signs an extension or opts to sign in free agency, which that would be the opt out and then sign long term, that we wouldn't be able to trade for him. But it's funny because all these Celtics guards of the past are coming up this summer. Obviously, Jrue Holiday, this whole thing's centered on him, but Marcus Smart is a name out there. Kyrie
That's
Irving,
going to be brought up
his
no matter
status is
what.
up in the air this summer. But ultimately, talking about the Mavericks in general, they're certainly a viable team for Jrue Holiday. And from your guys' perspective, what makes the Mavericks one of the bigger trade suitors, I would say the one of the more likely trade suitors for Jrue Holiday from your guys' perspective, specifically you, Franco?
Looking at the Dallas Mavericks, they fell into a very, very lucky position this year. Nico Harrison must have went to a couple Sunday services after he made that Luka trade and repented his sins. And
No, there was some voodoo magic going on there. I mean, come on, you trade away Luka Doncic, and like it hit me earlier. It's like, how do they have Cooper? Like that's the next. That's like that could be way better than Luka in 5 years. Way better.
so,
Ridiculous.
so looking at that, you want to be able to build now the whole direction in Dallas has switched over to building a contending team while building a foundation around Cooper Flag with players that will be around for years to come and also be able to give that veteran experience. So that's where I could see the possibility of Jrue Holiday coming in, Kyrie dealing with those injuries alongside dealing with the contract situation. So I don't think it would be the best move for Dallas, especially looking at that $32 million contract Jrue Holiday has. I don't think that's what they're going to be investing in. I like the two other options on the list because they are more players that would be more comfortable taking that bench positioning when Kyrie comes back or based on the rotation and can also come in at a lower number for them. So Lonzo Ball, Chris Paul, and also bringing back Spencer Dinwiddie wouldn't be the worst idea for him either. And I could see them as a suitor, and also on the Celtics end of things, there's a couple of players that could pique interest. As we've heard in multiple mock trades, PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford are the two names that you hear more specifically when the Mavericks are brought up in these Jrue conversations. So looking at PJ Washington would be a great fill-in bridge player while Tatum is out next year. And also the main one that we would be looking for is Daniel Gafford with the gaping hole at the center position. After this year, you're basically looking at Neemias Queta and Kristaps Porzingis as your two centers that are still under contract, and Xavier Tillman. So that's not a good position to be in when it comes to the center position, especially with Kristaps Porzingis' injury history and the regression we've seen in his game. So if Daniel Gafford is added to a trade with Jrue Holiday involved, I think that's what would really take the Celtics and make it a done deal. But I would, if I'm looking at the Dallas Mavericks and I'm in that front office, I'm looking at cheaper options than Jrue Holiday.
I think there's three things from a Mavericks perspective that makes Jrue Holiday appealing. One of which, Seamus, you've already mentioned, but the first is timing. I think they're timing wise, they all kind of sync up. Dallas is a team that got really lucky with the draft lottery for whatever reason. You might think it is luck or rigged, whatever reason, right? They have the number one pick.
Interference.
Yes, so they have this really unique situation, kind of similar to what Boston had actually back in 2017, where you got your franchise guy for the next 15 years, assuming you don't trade him in Cooper Flag, right? They're going to go on, they're going to draft Cooper Flag. You have a 3-year window where you can screw around and try things, right? It does not matter. This next 3 years where Cooper Flag is starting his ascension into stardom in the NBA, whatever happens. You got Anthony Davis, you got Kyrie Irving, who is recovering from an ACL injury, a knee injury. So from a Dallas perspective, the timing works. They're going to give it a go in terms of compete for a championship around Davis and Kyrie for about 2 to 3 more years. They're going to try to give it a go with Cooper Flag kind of backing those guys up. The other reason, Seamus, you mentioned this one already, the second, number 2, is guards. They got no guards. They're in need of a point guard. And Jrue Holiday is kind of a perfect fit there at that starting point guard position for Dallas. Say Kyrie Irving does come back. Kyrie's kind of can slide into a modern day shooting guard in this positionless basketball game. You can start both of them and have an offense and defense kind of Knuckles and Sonic duo of a backcourt. And it could kind of work out. The third reason I look at it is Nico Harris in this crazy philosophy that he's pushing out there of the defense train, right? If Nico is so crazy on defense, Jrue Holiday is his point guard. He should be, right? You know, one of the best defensive point guards we've seen in the game, still up there in today's league in terms of perimeter defenders and what he can do. So I think there's a lot of appealing factors from a Dallas standpoint, timing, positions and defensive ability. I think those three factors, if I'm Dallas, I'm looking at all those three and thinking to myself, Jrue might be a guy. You throw PJ Washington or Daniel Gafford Boston's way, maybe a pick. And if you're Brad, I think you're listening to that, right? You have to. I mean, it's a solid offer, I think.
Right. You mentioned the Dallas defensive philosophy, the Nico Harrison, Jason Kidd led philosophy of defense. I mean, that's the number one point on my list. Is Dallas clearly values defense from the Luka trade. That was the thing that Dallas at their press conference afterwards, they advertised to the public after the entire public attacked them for trading away Luka Doncic. They were, oh, well, Luka not the best defender, not the but we value defense, and it was the little shots at Luka Doncic. But they trade Luka for AD. There's your first point of why they clearly value defense. But if we're just looking at the player in which they're getting in return, Jrue Holiday, he's still a very valuable defender. I mean, offensively, we're talking about some regression from last season. Defensively, I thought there was some regression as well, but it wasn't as steep as the offensive end. And I felt like the defensive regression had more to do with him just turning on the on-off switch every other night, especially during the regular season in January and February and December, specifically that portion of the season. And if you think about it too, the Celtics, when they're putting him on ice, that rhythm can be I would say a little over time construed, knowing that he's not playing consistently every single week. That could be a little different with the Mavericks. They might have the same plan with Jrue Holiday, but what's going to be interesting is if he is in fact traded to the Mavericks or any other team, how available will he be during the playoffs? Because this playoff run for the Celtics, he missed a couple games during the Magic series with a hamstring injury, and we weren't fully certain. He wasn't out of all the injuries in which the Celtics went through in that Knicks series. Jrue Holiday, he fell down to fourth, right? It was like Hauser's ankle popped up first. Then it was Tatum. He tore his Achilles. Brown's knee. Well, his knee was already a talking point, but Jrue Holiday, he wasn't very healthy during the playoffs last year. It'll be interesting to see if a team in the future, puts him on ice the way the Celtics did. But I felt like the defense for Jrue Holiday during his best games of the year was still very much there. And he's one of those very sound, very technical defenders. It's sometimes more about experience with those type of guys than just pure athleticism and pure
And right
ability
place
on
at
that
the
end.
right time.
Right. And it's you look at some of the best defenders in the league. We like to pinpoint a lot of young guys because of their athleticism and their
Draymond Green.
their
Right.
speed and their quickness. But exactly, Draymond Green is an example of how you can be an elite defender without owning those traits within one's game. Jrue Holiday is also one of those guys as well. Not the most athletic guard, not the quickest guard, but certainly one of the best defensive guards in the league, just simply off of his technique and all of his experience over time. And I'm sure the repetitions in practice as well, uh, pretty well every single day for these NBA guys. But also Jrue Holiday, great connector and glue guy for the Celtics. He could become that for the Mavericks as well. He could become that for any team out there, but specifically the Dallas Mavericks, welcoming Cooper Flag into the building and welcoming a fairly new roster. We forget last year's roster for the Mavericks, very wonky, very all over the place. In the first half of the season, a lot of injuries. Second half of the season, they trade away Luka Doncic. Those injuries persist. It was a roster that just was everywhere last season. Next season, it'll be somewhat of a completely new roster, and Jrue Holiday could be somebody who comes in and really is a great connector and glue guy for the Mavericks next year, as he was for the Celtics 2 years ago and even last season with the C's. So in terms of the Mavericks, I mean, I think they would certainly value Jrue Holiday for for those items alone. But I already talked about this. The Mavericks don't have many reliable guards. Irving still up in the air, $44 million player option. Jaden Hardy and Brandon Williams, the only two Mavs guards under contract next season without Kyrie Irving, if you don't want to count him. Dinwiddie and Dante Exum, they're going to hit the free agency market. We don't know what's going to happen with him. Already mentioned that. But I want to mention this aspect too. Jrue Holiday can both fill in during Kyrie's absence and can fill in next to Kyrie once Kyrie comes back. I think that's also a point that the Mavericks will consider is Kyrie Irving is likely not going to be available until around Christmas time next year, given how late his ACL tear came into last season. It was in March. Might be available in November, maybe December, maybe it could be longer than that. But knowing the Mavericks may have to go a couple of weeks, if not months, without Kyrie Irving, Jrue Holiday can slot in there, be the number one guard, and can add to this guard rotation, but also be somebody that plays next to Kyrie once Kyrie comes back. And Rob, you mentioned it, that Sonic and Knuckles duo. It's like
Right.
defense and offense. Jrue Holiday,
Kyrie,
elite defender,
Jrue.
Kyrie Irving, elite offensive player, and that's in the same backcourt. And you have that good trade off there between both of those guys. But Jrue Holiday, he won't be asked to be the main ball handler on offense when Kyrie comes back, and that's important because Jrue Holiday is the main ball handler, isn't always the most efficient guard. He's an okay playmaker, he's an okay scorer, but he with the Celtics, what made him so valuable was he was doing it behind the scenes. Everybody's focus was always on Brown and Tatum and even Porzingis. And then Jrue Holiday would just be, backdoor cut to the rim, or he's standing there in the dunker spot, or he's standing there in the corner. And Jrue Holiday wasn't necessarily a guard with the Celtics that needed to create all the time. And I think he's at that stage in his career where you don't want Jrue Holiday creating all the time. And that's never really been his game. If you look back on Philadelphia, New Orleans, and Milwaukee, he's not been this crazy creating guard for himself. And in this Mavericks system, when Kyrie comes back, Kyrie's going to be the main ball handler, and Jrue Holiday can kind of fade into that role in which he was playing more so with the Celtics. So that to me right there, I think Jrue Holiday certainly fits into that equation with Kyrie in the backcourt and Kyrie potentially coming back next season whenever that happens. But furthermore, the Mavericks, if you talk about the Celtics and Mavericks wheeling and dealing with Jrue Holiday, the Mavericks, they own a little bit of a lopsided roster right now. There is a logjam at forward with Cooper Flagg entering the building in Dallas. There's just an absolute logjam. You have Cooper Flagg, PJ Washington, Caleb Barton, Najee Marshall, Max Christie, and you have Prosper sitting there at the end, who's still a 22-year-old forward who maybe Dallas still feels good about. I mean, he's only 22, he's still very young, hasn't played too much, but that's 6 forwards right there. And you also have Klay Thompson, who's a definitive shooting guard right now with the Mavs, definitive too. But even himself, he can kind of play that forward position a little bit, given his height. And then if you look at it, Anthony Davis, you count him as a forward, but he's really a big, let's face it.
Right.
But 6 forwards on the roster, including Cooper Flagg, and there's just not enough minutes for all 6 of those guys. I mean, Prosper, young guy, probably not getting any minutes, but the other 5, right? Flagg is going to command minutes coming into the league. 100%. Cooper Flagg's going to command minutes.
He'll need like 30, 32 a game.
He'll probably start with the Mavericks. Like that's kind of the direction.
That's without a doubt.
Yeah,
because why would you, if you're the Mavericks, why are you, we got this 18-year-old potential generational superstar we just fell into. Why would you start PJ Washington over him? Like, just think about that. Like, why would you do that?
We shouldn't be surprised by anything Dallas does anymore. 1, but 2, Seamus, that's got to be the biggest point. Like, are Dallas, the more I think about it, the more you're just talking, I'm like, okay. Like, are Dallas and Boston like this match made in heaven for Jrue Holiday, where it's like Boston, if you look at their forward depth, quite frankly, now with Tatum out, even with Tatum there, it was really Tatum and Brown, and then the rest were kind of like meh. Like Hauser was great for what he was as a shooter, right? Phenomenal. He's a career 40% shooter, right? Great shooter, but like depth wise at forward, it was always meh with Tatum. Now that Tatum's out, it's gone from like meh to like complete trash. So you look at Boston's depth and it's like, okay, maybe there's a match here, but I have a kind of a question for you guys, because I know you guys have been working trade machines, nonstop. Because I won't lie, I've been here in the background, right? Kind of playing around and trying to wheel and deal something between Boston and Dallas. What does it have to look like if we want a player like PJ Washington in return for a Jrue Holiday? Have you guys worked stuff out like that? Or
well, it is very challenging. Dallas is going to have to make some moves prior to making a move for Jrue Holiday,
like
unless
Klay
they
Thompson,
want
maybe.
And yes, they would have to somehow dump off Klay Thompson in another deal, and that would also just make sense roster wise with what they're going to be going for. The trade that I have seen out there is, let's say, PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford, and for Jrue Holiday. I'm sure there would be some picks and something else in there. The Dallas Mavericks are still over that second apron, so that trade wouldn't go through. So you'd have to include another player like a Dwight Powell into that trade. So this could end up being a 3-team trade in some retrospects if the Dallas Mavericks are hell bent on Jrue Holiday being a Dallas Maverick. So I don't think that they are foaming at the mouth to get Jrue Holiday, because there are definitely other options out there that fit the mask of what Jrue Holiday can contribute to your team, if not at a cheaper contract value.
Right.
So
well, I also wonder from a Celtics perspective, Franco, what does it look like, right? Because the biggest thing I noticed that if you're getting Gafford and Washington back, right? If I'm not mistaken, Gafford is due what? Gafford's due 14.3, Washington's 14.1. So you're giving up 32 from Jrue, but you're getting back 28. What else?
You're not losing any. So you're not making any leverage when you're going into it clears up some financial space in the future, because all 3 of those players, Gafford, Washington,
so that's what
Powell,
it is right there.
are all on a 1-year contract.
Oh, it's expiring. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So those contracts would expire after next year. So that frees up the 3 years of contracts and money that you would owe Jrue Holiday.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that would be the benefit of that for the Celtics.
Yeah, that's the biggest appeal with Gafford and Washington, is both of those players are expiring. But here's the thing. Well, first of all, let's get this out of the way. The Mavericks, you talk about the whole, are the Mavericks and Celtics meant for each other with the Jrue Holiday trade and all the talks going on there. The Mavericks, they house a lot of tradable contracts. Many tradable contracts. Klay Thompson, 16.6. Daniel Gafford, you already mentioned this, Rob. Daniel Gafford, 14.4. PJ Washington, 14.2. Caleb Martin, 9.6. Najee Marshall, $9 million. Max Christie, 7.7. Jaden Hardy, $6 million. And then you have Lively, Powell, Prosper, and Brandon Williams all under 5.5. And when you get to that stage, you're basically just a throw in. And some of these guys, Lively and Brandon Williams, I don't really see them thrown into a deal because of the youth of themselves. But everybody, I mean, outside of AD and Kyrie, everybody's on the table for the Dallas Mavericks. Literally everybody. Kyrie owns a player option, as we mentioned several times, but AD, he's making 54.1. They just traded Luka for him. He's definitely, I don't see him being dealt anywhere anytime soon. But multiple tradable contracts for the Dallas Mavericks. But I'm going to center in on Gafford and Washington, because we had this conversation on the Celtics Nation Rise podcast. The problem with Washington and Gafford, right? And even the Celtics and Mavericks trading between each other. Number one, the Celtics and Mavericks trading between each other, the main issue in that, other than the personnel making sense, is without a third team, neither team is really achieving their goal of cutting money. Because the Mavericks, on one hand, they want to cut money. Because think about this. All these tradable contracts, Thompson, Gafford, Washington, all over 10 million. And you could say Marshall and Martin too. They're over 9 million. Those contracts in particular, you're going to add a $13 million deal to that, a $14 million deal to that with Cooper Flag. So the Mavericks are already adding to their salary number this summer They want to get off. So when they're trading one of these forwards, which I highly anticipate they will this summer, whether it's Washington, Martin, Marshall, or Christie or Prosper, or even Klay Thompson, if they're trading one of these forwards, what the Mavericks want to do is number one, alleviate their logjam, but also get rid of some money. So if they're getting back Jrue Holiday in return, they're actually adding money to their books without sending multiple players away, which could definitely happen. They could be sending away multiple players. That's where a third team gets involved with the Celtics and Mavericks, and making the money work from a logistical standpoint of each team wanting to shed salary. I mean, that's also the thing about Gafford and Washington going to Boston is you're shaving $4 million potentially in salary there. And I know you could add Dwight Powell to the deal and it'd be a straight swap in terms of the money. With that, the Celtics are not cutting any money whatsoever. So that's definitely a roadblock. But then you could also bring up the scenario of maybe the Celtics move Porzingis or Hauser, move away their money, and maybe they still move away Jrue Holiday and get something good in return for Jrue Holiday. But Gafford and Washington, they're expiring. So Franco, you're completely right. The whole future money outlook on this thing, that would be the main selling point of Gafford and Washington is not only they're solid players you could add into the rotation, you're cutting future money from the books. But with that being said, would you need draft capital in return for those guys? Because if you're just getting them for 1 year and then not paying them, Washington and Gafford, which you can pay one of them, let one of them walk, who knows? Or you cannot pay either one of them. And that's where the whole cost saving scenario comes into play with Jrue Holiday over time is you could cut that $37 million 3 seasons from now. You could cut that $34.8 million 2 seasons from now. 34.8 and 37.2 you could completely eradicate from your books in the next after next season. That's the main selling point. But under those circumstances, you're watching PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, your two main assets you received for Jrue Holiday for the Celtics, walk in free agency for nothing. So that's where this is like, how do we balance this between the Mavericks and Celtics? I've been on this point for probably 3 weeks now, thinking, okay, Gafford, like I'm gonna throw this out there. I think Klay Thompson could be the name moved to Boston in this scenario. I could see Klay Thompson move to Boston. Now I will say this: the Mavericks went out and got Klay Thompson from the Warriors, in free after during free agency. I feel like Nico Harrison might be in on Klay Thompson, even though it makes no sense because Klay Thompson has definitely regressed within his career, especially on the defensive end of the floor. But Klay Thompson, the reason I look at him as a name that could be moved to Boston in a deal for Jrue Holiday, number one, Klay Thompson, he doesn't give you that same problem. He doesn't provide you that same problem Washington and Gafford provide, which is you're going to have to pay Washington and Gafford to keep him around. And then that becomes well, would you rather have Jrue Holiday or Washington or Gafford 2 seasons, 3 seasons from now? And that cost saving scenario with Washington and Gafford, you don't have to see them walk. With Klay Thompson, he's under a 2-year deal. And so you're retaining him for next season, but he's not an expiring. And potentially you could trade him as an expiring $16 million contract next offseason or even next trade deadline, which would be 2027. So looking that far away with Klay Thompson, because he's a 2-year deal, you could retain flexibility moving ahead into the future. But that's one of my main notes here on the Celtics this summer. The Celtics could take the route of asset accumulation. Straight up. I mean, they could take the route of asset accumulation. That would be Klay Thompson, because maybe the Celtics don't trade for players in which produce for them right away. I mean, think about the 21-22 season when the Celtics made the finals. The 21 offseason was about asset accumulation. They flipped Kemba into Al Horford, who Al Horford at the time, more valuable than Kemba. Kemba, we saw in the long run, couldn't even play. Meanwhile, Al Horford is still producing at 39 years old. So they flip Kemba for Al Horford, and they go out and get Dennis Schroeder. They go out and get Josh Richardson. And those guys didn't appear in the finals for the Celtics because they were traded at the deadline. The Celtics accumulated assets in which they could move later on down the line. That could be the same here with the Mavericks and potentially acquiring somebody like Klay Thompson. Washington and Gafford, they could be in that realm too. But Klay Thompson with the $16 million on his deal 2 seasons from now, that could retain more flexibility for the Celtics moving into the future if they simply just view these guys as assets they want to move along the line, along later on down the line. Gafford and Washington, that being said, obviously Klay Thompson, I mean, he's 35 years old. Gafford's 26. Washington's 26. Much younger options. And they're going to demand paydays going into their primes are already in, or as you look at their age, they're already into their primes. It's a hard thing to balance between the Mavericks and the Celtics because to me, it's like you don't really. I think Caleb Martin, 3 years, $9 million on his deal per year. You could see Najee Marshall the next 2 years, $9 million. I mean, I understand the Mavericks will be reluctant to move off those deals. Number one, Caleb Martin, they just traded for him at the deadline. Najee Marshall, they just signed last offseason. And those are 2 really good deals. If you look at the 2 forwards and their production, Najee Marshall and Caleb Martin, those are pretty good deals for a team. But Gafford, Washington, you have to pay them further on down the line in the future. And if you don't, you let them walk. And under that circumstance, I think you would have to see a bunch of draft capital come for Jrue Holiday from Dallas. I think that's the scenario. But that's also like how much draft capital is Dallas willing to give up for Jrue Holiday right now?
I'd say like a first, right? Like that's probably what we're gonna get for Jrue is like a first. You give up Jrue, you get a player.
Well, Dallas's standards too. It's like they received 1 first-round pick for Luka. You think they're giving up 2 for Jrue Holiday? Like seriously,
yeah. I do think the question is like, can the Celtics afford to, because the Celtics aren't just like the Celtics are in cap purgatory. Like they're going to move Holiday, right? So say if they were just to move Jrue Holiday off their books, right, without retaining any assets like in return, they are still just barely over the first apron by $500,000. So like that's with returning, like getting nothing in back. So they are pretty in purgatory right now. It's like, can you move Holiday and not afford to get assets that help you now? You know what I'm saying? Where it's like, okay, so say if you move Holiday to Dallas, can you afford to trade Holiday for a pick in 2029? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, is that a path that it's like, okay, well, we moved off Jrue, but at least we got a pick in 3 years. You know what I'm saying? Like, is that the path with Jrue, or is the path with Jrue like immediate draft capital? You know what I'm saying? It's like long-term draft capital or immediate draft capital with Jrue, or does it not even matter?
This is where the direction of the team is so unknown at this point in time, because Brown and Tatum, it's like, if you want to extend their championship window, trading away Jrue Holiday for a bunch of future draft capital in 29, 30 and beyond, it's like, what is that going to do to the Brown and Tatum window? You know what I'm saying? Like, what is that exactly going to do for Brown and Tatum? Like, you're trading away one of the most crucial pieces on the 24 championship team for draft capital in the 2030s when Brown and Tatum are going to be 30 years old. Like, you're giving away a huge part of the team for essentially nothing during the next Brown and Tatum phase of contending for a title. So I almost feel like you have to get something tangible for them.
Right.
Like a Washington, like a Gafford. But then that becomes, do you pay them in the future? Like that, how do you
and then are you not just in the same? So like my thing is like, if you trade, I completely agree. If you trade Jrue and you get like a 2030 first round pick, like at that point, like, okay, like, do we cut Brown from the book? Like at that point,
right? It becomes like, well, do we trade Brown and Tatum and reset?
Yeah, exactly. Like is that I think that's where. So if I'm Brad, it's like I completely agree. That's why PJ Washington is so appealing to me. He's 26 years old. He fits the Brown and Tatum window, and he's a player that you can re-sign. You can bring PJ back next year. You can afford to do that if you play this offseason properly. So it's like, but I think that's the question. It's like, and that's the unknown, right? Like once, and I think, I personally, I think Hauser's the first domino to fall, but what I'm hearing with actively listening to calls, Holiday might be the first domino to fall. I think the first domino that falls tells us everything we'll need to know in terms of the direction the Celtics are going. because again, like even what year draft pick Brad Stevens decides to get back, right? That tells us something, right? Like if they get a 2026 first or a 2025 first, you're thinking, okay, like they're going for players now. They're going to extend the Brown and Tatum window. They have faith in Tatum coming back. They got faith in Brown coming back. If you see Holiday moved for like a 2020 or 31 pick, you got to start to think, okay, Boston might be saying to themselves, okay, we're kind of we're the ship, we're jumping ship here.
But also too, think about this, and this would be tough, but this would be because of the money. Think about this: the Celtics, they could potentially receive PJ Washington for Jrue Holiday, and then maybe, just maybe, Daniel Gafford is sent to a third team,
right?
and that could, and whoever else, Dwight Powell, whoever else you want to throw into the deal, those guys could be moved to a third team. Jrue Holiday moved to the Mavericks, PJ Washington to the Celtics. But what's so tough about that is normally you want Gafford and like under that circumstance, you might look at it and go, oh, let us just get Washington and Gafford. And then it would almost be like we're picking between the two players next offseason, almost because, and it's possible. I mean, we could attain both players and maybe their extensions don't look audacious, right? They're not crazy to the point where they might just add up. Like that's where actually this is where this is intriguing is say, 3 seasons from now with Jrue Holiday, he's making $37 million. Could Gafford and Washington's deal add up to a number lower than that? And then you're thinking, well, dang, we just turned a 35-year-old into two 26-year-olds making less money combined 2 seasons from now. That's intriguing. That's intriguing. That's if their extensions come in, at non-audacious $20-30 million numbers.
That's the scary part. The scary part with Washington. I think PJ Washington is a real great talent. I think he's got a lot. I think he's a really good, great modern four. A worry of mine is bringing PJ to Boston in a year where PJ Washington's kind of like the third dude, right? It would be like Brown, White, and PJ, and then PJ's balling, right? Which I again, PJ's a great talent. You give him the minutes, you give him the looks, you give the actions, he's going to produce. Next thing you know, you have like an 18 to 20 point per game player, maybe 6 rebounds, 4 assists, right? A block or 2, inflated stats with no Tatum, and you're sitting there and you're like, oh shit, this guy's getting, $28-32 million contracts offer. We can't match. Like that's a possibility too. You bring PJ in, he exceeds expectations with no Tatum in the ball more. And it's like, I can't pay PJ Washington $33 million a year. We just can't cough up that much money.
That's the big question is like, what number is he going to command next summer? And
right.
Also, is it like, because I look at a comparable player, it's like, is he going to make Derek White money or not? Because I see Derek White as a better player than PJ Washington, but we know how these markets work. It's like you're a forward and you're the 10th best forward in the league or wherever you slot in. It's like, hey, I should be making this X dollar. And especially if he overperforms next season, that's going to be the case. But it's very hard to evaluate from a Celtics perspective. Like even thinking, say we attain, so like I think that could be a viable route. You attain Gafford and Washington, maybe a future first as well, to attain that future first later on down the line. And say next summer, maybe we're able to ink them both. Maybe it comes in at a lower number than what Jrue Holiday would be making. Again, you might have two 26-year-olds making less than what Jrue Holiday is making combined.
Right.
But also, you could hedge yourself against, say, if PJ Washington plays well next season and the Celtics lose him, well, you still have Gafford. And like, okay, we can pay Gafford. We're gonna keep him. We allow PJ to walk instead of, because I'm thinking of a scenario with a third team involved where I'm going, why would we let, it makes sense for salary perspective, but then not in terms of asset overturn and accumulation. Because I see a salary perspective where, okay, we allow, say, Gafford to be sent to a third team. Say in a deal between the Mavericks, like the Mavericks are like, we want to get rid of Gafford, or we have too many bigs. It's like we have Lively, we have Davis, like we have too many bigs. We want to get rid of Gafford. But we're going, oh, we don't want to take Gafford because we don't want to take on his extra money. This is $28 million and say Dwight Powell's in the deal. It's like, oh, we're getting 32 for 32 back. we don't want to do that. Send him to a third team. Send Powell and Gafford to a third team. But it's like under that circumstance, right? That right there, it would make sense from a salary perspective for the Celtics. Like, okay, we get PJ Washington back. He's making 14 versus Jrue Holiday, who's making 32. Instant savings right there.
I mean, you
And
have
then
money
even
to
next
play
summer,
around
we'll have the ability to potentially re-sign PJ Washington without worrying about another asset, saying Gafford or whoever else. But you could see a scenario where Washington, like you said, Rob, demands upwards of $30 million. The Celtics can't pay him. And then if you just had Washington, you don't have the. So even if the Celtics attain two players within this deal, the Mavericks deal, it's like one of them could just be a filler for the other one leaving later on in time. Because if you say you re-sign PJ Washington to a 20, $25 million deal, maybe Gafford becomes a player in which the Celtics go, well, he's making 15 somewhere, and the Wizards want to give him that, or the Pistons, or whoever out there wants to give him 15. We're going to let him walk. Like that could happen too.
I also do think there is a world where you can bring you can bring both Gafford and PJ in and end up paying them. Gafford's market, I think, is going to stick right at $14 to $20 million. I don't think he's getting much. Like even if Gafford exceeds what he normally does by what I expect, he's not going to be crazy. PJ, I think, has a higher ceiling. But I think there's a world where you can bring in PJ, you bring in Gafford, and you can re-sign them if you play this offseason right. Because you got to think, okay, Holiday's on the move too. Right, you also are probably going to get off KP at some point, and you're also probably going to get off Hauser at some point. So that right there is 11, 33, 30, 30. That's like $70 million right there off the book next year. You're bringing in, so there is a path where, okay, if you're kind of changing the direction here, you bring in Gafford, you bring in Washington, you move Hauser and Porzingis for just draft capital. You fill out the back end of the roster with minimum guys in draftees this offseason, right? There's a world where you're going into next season. You can pay PJ that 30 if he plays like it. You can pay Gafford that 17. That's a 20 that he'll probably demand. And you kind of got yourself a solid core. Just, again, a lot of information at you guys. I know it's almost like I wish we had a whiteboard to like draw lines and like connect stuff.
I know we're basically just going over every scenario, and I'm like, well, there's a scenario where it's like, do you know that if you bring out every combination, it's like you're two here and there's three here, and then you rearrange the two with the three, and then
goes up there. Yeah, no, I know.
And we're talking about different periods of time too. It's like, what does it look like in 2027 versus next season versus right now versus savings versus rotation? It's like it all interconnects.
You can only imagine what Brad's board looks like.
I can't imagine what any like that. That's where I just believe there has to be more competent organizations than others out there when it comes to this stuff. Like teams have like some teams have massive analytical departments and whiteboards and
then you could be on the
measurements
New
of
York Jets
value.
and you have your grandson playing franchise mode, making your roster.
Yeah,
a la the New York Giants. But Franco, from your perspective, the Mavericks, any other thoughts on this?
The Mavericks, I think that it's a very interesting move if they were to dance with the Mavericks. I think the players that you can get in return are very intriguing. If you're even looking at the lower paid players on the Mavericks roster, you look at players like Najee Marshall and Caleb Martin. If they're able to acquire them, they're two of those types of players in a 3-team trade and are just able to fill in the bench. I think that this year is all about cutting down on the salary cap and getting foundational bench pieces, rotational pieces that when Tatum does come back in a year or so, they can work alongside him and coexist with them, and while keeping this team competitive in next year. Because I don't see the Celtics being in a position where they're going to be less than the play-in spot in this heading into next year with just Brown leading the team. And I think
you say that, but then the Sixers this past season, it's like you see what can go wrong.
Yeah.
And you see what you can get for that, I guess.
Yeah.
Although I never advocate for relying on dumb luck, as everybody knows.
Yeah, so just with the Dallas Mavericks, they have a lot going on over there, and adding another $30 million contract just doesn't sound right to what is they have built as a foundation over there. And I just look at them looking more at the free agent market, like a D'Angelo Russell, who I know is going to be on the free agent market. There's a few other players out there. I don't have the free agent list in front of me, but there's a few point guards in that area, but they are over the second tax apron. But there's still probably interest to join this Mavericks team. But I think they're going to be looking to save money, just like the Celtics are, and keep that competitive edge. And Jrue Holiday could be that match for him, but it just wouldn't be the most logical.
And the Mavericks, I'll say, with this entire Jrue Holiday conversation, we're talking a lot about the Mavericks. However, other teams are also involved within the Jrue Holiday talks as well. One of those teams being the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, the Los Angeles Clippers back in the summer of 2023 did own interest. If anybody remembers, the two teams trying to trade for Jrue Holiday back in September of 2023, after the Bucks had moved Jrue Holiday to the Portland Trailblazers, the two teams highly linked to Jrue Holiday was the Boston Celtics, who eventually, obviously, we know today, the Boston Celtics attained Jrue Holiday and won the championship, which was an amazing story for them. But the other team was the Los Angeles Clippers, and now the Clippers, they're marked as a team who could pursue Jrue Holiday in the summer of 2025 after not getting him back in the summer of 2023. But this is a report from Hoops Hype via Booth Newspapers. Holiday is expected to be pursued by several teams on the trade market, and a league source tells Mass Live that the Los Angeles Clippers are one of the teams expected to show interest in the now 35-year-old guard as of yesterday this offseason. The Celtics outbid several teams, including the Clippers, per sources, for Holiday back in 2023, as we mentioned here, when the Blazers made the two-time All-Star available following the Damian Lillard blockbuster deal to the Bucks. Boston ended up dealing Malcolm Brogdon, Robert Williams, and two future firsts for Holiday in the deal before trading him that helped the Celtics to the 2024 title. So yeah, everything I just said there in this line of text. The Clippers, very much a team interested in Jrue Holiday. I would say they're a team that always puts their hat into the ring for players like this. Veteran all-star players who, with the Clippers ran by Steve Ballmer, it's possible, from my perspective, that the Clippers could just attain anybody, that literally anybody out there on the market. I mean, Luka Doncic. I mean, I don't know if the Lakers are moving him or not, but the Clippers are one of those teams that certainly, they're not afraid to spend some money. They're not afraid to move some guys around. We've seen that in recent years, and I would say at this point with Kawhi Leonard and James Harden, they might be in desperation mode. 3 first-round exits in a row. They don't really have a young direction in them. I don't see another world with the Clippers here where they don't push the throttle full steam ahead on Kawhi Leonard, James Harden, and potentially more veterans on the roster. But looking at that rumor right there, what are your guys' initial thoughts on a potential deal between the Celtics and Clippers for Jrue Holiday?
Um,
Franco,
I
well,
don't.
Franco, you take this. I
All
gotta
right.
step. I gotta stop saying you guys. It's like, let's throw it to somebody. Like, we
Well,
gotta get we gotta
no,
get the
no,
rhythm here.
No,
it's, you say the Clippers, and that's a tough one. It's a tough one.
yeah.
So,
It took me a second
yeah,
to
see,
think
I'm
of
like
my
thinking, I'm like,
answer. Uh,
no.
I just don't think that is the move for the Clippers, because I'm looking at a player on their team who I think plays the same role as a Jrue Holiday, and that's Norman Powell. And I believe Norman Powell is a better player than Jrue Holiday while being a few years younger. So it would be kind of a redundant trade if the Celtics were to swap for Jrue Holiday for Norman Powell. Um, the oh, and also Norman Powell is on a 1-year contract, but also keeping Norman Powell, it would make this team's lineup a little bit wonky. You'd be running Holiday, Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and Norman Powell and Zubac as your starting five, which is not what I would say is an ideal starting five. Obviously, you'd have the balance between defense and offense would all come from Harden, and you'd just be relying on Holiday and Powell and Kawhi to kind of carry over that. But the trade that I'm looking at for, if I'm looking at the Clippers, two players I would be interested in are Derek Jones Jr. and Bogdan Bogdanovic. They're both on 2-year deals, so you kind of have that flexibility. And as we brought up earlier, the becoming those trade assets. Those are if the Steve Ballmer was ringing Brad Stevens' phone off the wall, then that would be something I would consider. But even then, it doesn't look good for either side, and I can see the Clippers going for another wing to match up with Kawhi Leonard. Obviously, the Paul George matchup didn't work out in the beginning of their careers, and they weren't able to advance upon that. But I would see them trying to add a younger, maybe sub 28 years old of a player to match alongside Kawhi Leonard. I would names that come to my head off the top are players like Cam Johnson, Michael Porter Jr., and Mikal Bridges. Those are some names that come to mind for me when I'm looking at players that would fit well next to a Kawhi Leonard in these few years, because these guys are in their final pushes and their contracts are not that appealing. So when you have two aging all-stars, you're going to try to get some pieces around them that can be kind of the players that you can pass the torch down to when they regress. But I don't see that being Jrue Holiday. So I understand the interest, but I don't at the same time.
Well, it's funny too, because Seamus, you said Clippers, and I instantly thought to myself, there's no way financially they could pull that off, right?
No, they're under the first apron.
The more I look at it, they're just a move or two away. They're a trade or two. They're 2 players away from being out of the first apron. Just a hypothetical here, guys, from a Clippers perspective. If they were to ship off Bogdanovich and Derek Jones Jr., right, who are making 16 and 10 respectively, in exchange for Hauser and Holiday, they would be out of the first apron. They would be almost $7 million out of the first apron. So surprising financial situation for LA. Here's my thing with LA. From their perspective, Jrue Holiday makes a lot of sense for the Clippers, right? They are kind of the home of getting older stars because they're the lesser of the LA teams. But if I'm the Clippers, I wouldn't go for Jrue Holiday, because you have a Jrue Holiday and Chris Dunn that you're paying $5 million off the bench.
That's not the name that I called out.
I was going to say Jrue Holiday is basically just a way better Chris Dunn.
Right?
But worth a lot more.
So I'll say this: if we can convince the Clippers to send back Chris Dunn alongside Derek Jones Jr., Chris Dunn, the former Celtic, a little quick tenure in Boston. But like, that's a trade I'm intrigued in. But here's my problem. In Franco, while you were going at it, I won't lie, I was in the trade machine looking at options, right? Something I noticed is that the Clippers, they can't trade their pick this year, right? Because a deal I had in mind was maybe Derek Jones Jr., Chris Dunn in a first-round pick, which would be pick 30 from the Clippers in exchange for Jrue Holiday. They have that I believe what the Stepien rule that doesn't allow you to Stepien rule that doesn't give you the back. So that is a problem for the Clippers. But I do think there's a world where the Clippers have some assets that are kind of appealing to me, none of which are really young. I will say that a lot of them, for example, like Derek Jones Jr. is 28, Bogdanovich is 32. I would not be a fan of Bogdanovich, although that would be a path that I could see realistic. Dunn, as good as he's been playing, I mean, Dunn's not young. He's 31 years old. So they do have Yeah, I mean, they do have, like, if we wanted to wait later on in the free agency, Kobe Brown's a name that I wouldn't mind seeing come back to us a little bit on the young. So, like, Clippers, maybe. I could see rumors of the Clippers all summer, right? But I don't know if I see a world where the Clippers and the Celtics can actually find common ground in which both teams feel like they're getting the right value in return.
That's the thing about the Dallas Mavericks is there are multiple routes with the Mavericks that one can look at and go, "Oh, this makes sense for the Mavericks. This makes sense for the Celtics. This makes sense for both of these teams." Meanwhile, the Clippers, I feel like it's like threading a needle, right? It's like, okay,
Right.
we got to kind of this has to be a perfect window within this deal. Uh, I just conjured up one on Fanspo, and and this is completely hypothetical here. Norman Powell and Chris Dunn to Boston. All right, that you'd be saving $6 million if you're the Celtics and getting back two pretty pretty nice assets, I would say, in Powell and Dunn. And Dunn is the future asset. Powell is the asset still to be paid in the future. And I'll say this about Powell: we don't know how much he'll actually demand for his next contract. It's possible that it comes in at a lower number. Who knows? And then Bogdanovich, he's traded to a third team. I have him going to the Nets, and then Jrue Holiday to the Clippers. The only question I have here when when I look at the threading of the needle scenario, how many assets are the Clippers actually willing to give away within
Right.
their rotation to receive Jrue Holiday? Because we know Jrue Holiday is a good player, but say in this scenario, right? It's like, okay, the Celtics save money, get back okay assets in return. Bogdanovich is sent to a third team. His salary in the future is offloaded from the Clippers, and the Clippers get back Jrue Holiday. In this scenario, are the Clippers giving away too many rotation pieces? Because think about their playoff run, which was unfortunately short for them, only 7 games in the first round against the Nuggets, a hard fought 7 games. Powell, a huge part of that series. Chris
Yeah.
Dunn, a huge part of that
Yeah,
series. Bogdanovich, a
more
huge part of that
valuable
series.
than
And that's like
Holiday.
that's 3 of your 8 guys essentially within a playoff rotation. And I'm not. I'll just say this: I'm not a huge Bogdanovich or even Chris Dunn fan when it comes to playoff ball. Chris Dunn, the huge problem within his game, it's glaring. He can't make threes. He shot it at a higher percentage this past season, which obviously rewarded him more playoff time, especially in the playoffs. Uh, more minutes in the playoffs. But his shooting, particularly in that Denver series, was a glaring weakness within his game, and what's always been a glaring weakness within his game his entire NBA career. His defense has been something that's been around the whole time for Chris Dunn, and he's been an elite defender. But you look at his minutes are low. The reason his minutes are so low, he's not an offensive oriented player whatsoever. He can't shoot the ball. And I'm not a Chris Dunn playoff guy. I like him as a regular season piece. Oh, is he your ninth, 10th man? You can throw him in to your
Yeah,
rotation in the regular season. But in the playoffs, you want somebody that can you want him to be a spot minutes player in the playoffs,
right.
in my mind. You don't want him to be a consistent rotation guy because of his shooting ability. Powell is on the other spectrum. Defensively, Powell can be rough. Offensively, very elite player on that end of the floor. I can get his own buckets. He almost made the All Star team this past season for what he did during Kawhi's absence. But I just wonder those 3 players. Like, yes, Bogdanovich and Dunn. I see them as expendable because if I'm evaluating those two, Bogdanovich a disaster on defense, Dunn a disaster on offense. You could upgrade from those 2 players going ahead if you're the Clippers or any team out there. It's like I don't trust those guys as rotation players. That being said, if you're also giving up Norman Powell in this equation, which would be the main asset here if there weren't more picks into the future, I it's I look at that and go, is that too many guys? Then you start getting guys involved like Derek Jones Jr. as well. I don't think the Clippers are as inclined to trade a guy like him because his contract is phenomenal. $10 million next season and then $10.5 million in 26, 27. They signed him in free agency in the summer of 2024, coming off that finals run with the Mavericks. We saw Derek Jones Jr. against the Mavericks in that 2024 NBA Finals series. I think he's somebody that I think he's worth more than his contract. I think Derek Jones is worth a little bit more than his contract, and I think he has extreme value under that deal as the versatile two-way player in which he is, especially on the defensive end for the Clippers. But Leonard, Harden. The interesting thing to note here with Harden, $36.3 million player option this summer for James Harden. Is it possible James Harden declines that? And number one, I think the most realistic expectation is James Harden declines that and he re-signs with the Clippers long term with future money. Same thing as Kyrie Irving. You decline the option, you sign for, you give yourself guaranteed future money. It's going to be somewhat of the same number next year, even if he opts out, but it's going to be with 3 years added on to his deal. Is it possible though that James Harden maybe opts out and goes elsewhere, and the Clippers need a guard? That's just going to throw that out there. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's possible. Might as well bring it
I
up.
feel
Just
like all
saying,
the
player option.
I think all the player option, like on the free agent market, look like safe bets to be staying home.
Yeah. I would be very shocked if any of them left, but you never know. The NBA is very crazy. Offers swoop out of nowhere. Guys
You
don't
could
get the money
also,
which they want. Because say Harden, he wants 30 mil per year from the Clippers, and another team is like, or say he wants 30 mil a year, and the Clippers are like, no, we're only giving you 20, and there's another team out there that's giving him, X amount, because he's able to make more money with the Clippers, just period. But maybe the Clippers don't want to pay him, and maybe I'm just saying that could happen. That could happen.
something I could see with Harden too is, all right, Kawhi's only 33, right? Which, like, it feels like Kawhi should be like 36. So like Kawhi's still relatively, like, technically speaking, like his prime, like usually 34 is like the year it's like, okay, that's the hard drop, right? It's like downhill from there, no doubt. So I could see Harden declining his player option and then taking an annual cut where it's maybe he signs a 3-year, like 28, because he's making 33 right now. I believe he's on the book for a 1-year 36.3. So I could see him taking like an annual, like 2 to 3 year $30 million contract where he's cutting costs next season by $6 million for LA while also retaining $90 million. And you know what I'm saying? Like, I could see a path where they're like, okay, how can we cut costs for next season while also getting James Harden a good contract? I mean, maybe Harden doesn't want that, lose $6 million next year, but to lock yourself in for $90 million into your, 20 or 38th or your 30, when you turn 38 that season, that could be big for Harden. So that's a path that you could maybe see each team take.
Yeah, I think the route here is certainly, I think you're going to see a cut number next year potentially from Harden. Like you mentioned, it could come in at 30 million, 33, could come in below that, and I think he's going to attain a bunch of future money. He's going to receive a bunch of future money from the Clippers. But also look at the scenario and go, James Harden, 35, just came, like, his last NBA game, right? It was another terrible Game 7 for James Harden, which is just a theme of his entire career at this point in time. Just not a playoff performer. Defensively, just a complete mess still at this point in his career. Elite offensive player, but defensively, again, just a complete mess. And then in the playoffs, he just look at the entirety of his ability on the floor. The playoffs, Game 7, you have that moment happen in the Nuggets series. Is there a world where the Clippers look at James Harden and go, he's going to decline that player option for future money, but we don't really want to give him that future money? Is that possible? And maybe moves on elsewhere. That could trigger a Jrue Holiday domino for them and saying, okay,
Right.
we need to go out and get Jrue Holiday. And even under that circumstance, you could say, if I'm not mistaken here, if James Harden declines his player option, they'll be under, they'll be well under the luxury tax at that point. So you never know what could happen with the Clippers, because the rest of the roster too. I think the main names we're looking at in a Jrue Holiday deal, it's Norman Powell, it's Bogdanovich, Derek Jones Jr., and Chris Dunn. You could say Zubac too. Zubac, who's making $18.1 million next season. Zubac, I highly doubt the Clippers move.
They would have
Elite
to look
defensive center, good
why
contract for his worth.
When you have a center, there's no reason to move on from them if they're able to give you consistency.
And I don't see how you replace him if you're the Clippers.
No.
If you trade him for Jrue Holiday, how are you going to replace? You're going to have to do a
free agency,
simultaneous move
like
elsewhere
Capella.
to get a center.
Yeah,
so
they would have to bring in like Clint Capella from
Eh,
free agency or something like that.
So you have Powell at 20.5 million. You have Bogdanovich at 16 million, Derek Jones at 10 million, and then Chris Dunn at 5.4 million. Zubac, he's at 18.1 next season. Highly doubt he's moved. But those are the 5 players in which I'm looking at primarily between a potential Celtics and Clippers transaction. Leonard and Harden, Kawhi and James Harden not going to be moved. I mean, we already just talked about James Harden, but Kawhi Leonard for him, 50 million at the top of the roster, 50.3 next year. Not going to be moved by the Clippers. I highly doubt it. Everybody else on the roster, Batum, 4.9. Batum publicly mentioned he may retire after this season. Not a ton of value there in Batum whatsoever. He's age 36. Probably going to ride out the rest of his career on the Clippers if he's not traded at the deadline in a salary dump or something like that.
Right.
And then everybody else: Eubanks, Kobe Brown, Jordan Miller, Cam Christie, all just throw-ins, not anything of real value there. But the Clippers and Celtics, I see the Clippers why they would be interested in Jrue Holiday. The only thing is I just the amount of pathways to that happening between the Celtics and Clippers. I don't really like from a Celtics perspective. I just feel like you could get better if we're
Yeah.
talking about like a Mavericks deal for Washington and Gafford, if that's even on the table. We're talking about it as if it's on the table. It's logically on the table, but who knows what the Mavericks actually value those. I mean, look, they're both 26-year-old players. It's like the Mavericks could value them very highly for what they are, especially knowing Dallas loves defense and those two players. But if the Celtics were to receive a package like that over the phones, why would they then turn to the Clippers and go, oh, yeah, we want Norman Powell. Oh, yeah, we want Bogdanovich. Oh, yeah, we want Chris Dunn. All of those players for the Clippers, the only player I'd want from the Clippers straight up, Derek Jones. Derek Jones for his
Yeah.
contract, for his
Yeah.
worth on the floor. Norman
His
Powell,
age, 28.
Norman Powell, a little bit older of a player, more offensive oriented, not defensive oriented at all. Gonna demand a contract in the future. We don't know what that number is gonna look like. Chris Dunn and Bogdanovich, already mentioned it with them. Both of those guys are just, in my mind, they're playoff rotation nightmares. Bogdanovich can't play defense, and Chris Dunn cannot shoot the ball. That's just, I'm sorry. If you can't do either one of those things in the NBA playoffs, it's going to be a rough go. You're going to be watching from the bench. You're going to be watching courtside at MSG, unfortunately, if you're a future member of the Boston Celtics. However, another West Coast team, potentially in line during this as I can't see the graphics here, guys. That's what I'm struggling with. I can't see the graphics. You guys, my glasses are over here. I don't wear them on stream anymore. But another West Coast team potentially interested in Jrue Holiday, the Sacramento Kings. The Sacramento Kings, and this is where I just feel like they rope other Celtics players into Celtics rumors, so it gains more traction. Jrue Holiday, Marcus Smart on the Kings' radar. I mean, the Kings, they've watched the Celtics the last couple of years on ESPN and TNT, and they start Vivek in the background. Oh, I like Jrue Holiday. Oh yeah, that guy Marcus Smart. They defend well. Yes, we have to go get him. But this Hoops Hype report and this is via Mark Stein here, and then the secondary sources Hoops Hype, but this reads: Sacramento has continued to evaluate its point guard options according to league sources. New general manager Scott Perry, former general manager of the New York Knicks during their 20-year run of just being completely obsolete, immediately highlighted the Kings' need for improved playmaking during his introductory press conference, and sources have duly linked Sacramento to various guards known to be available this summer. That list includes Jrue Holiday in Boston and Marcus Smart in Washington, and stretches to more affordable free agent ball handlers like Malcolm Brogdon. I mean, what I feel like this rumor is fake with all of the Celtics mentioned in this rumor. I mean, Marcus Smart, Malcolm Brogdon, Jrue Holiday. What are we doing here? What are we? I don't understand.
Where'd you go?
I don't understand it. I don't understand. I feel like it's 100% fake because of the fact.
You disappeared from the stream.
Me?
Yeah. Where are you?
Me?
Yeah.
Where'd I go?
You're supposed to be right over there, and you're not.
What are you talking about?
You're not on the screen.
What are you talking about?
I don't know what's happening. You're not on the screen.
I'm on the screen on my end.
Am I on the screen on your end?
Yeah. Do we have
I
to
don't.
check? Well,
I don't.
Rob here exiting the live. But we are going to talk about the Sacramento Kings if we don't have a
Yeah.
technical difficulty here to sort out behind the scenes. I don't what?
Um.
Wait, let me look at the live stream real quick. I don't have the live stream
Yep.
pulled up. What am I? What is it? Is as long as it's good on the live stream, we're completely
Hold on.
fine. We're completely fine. Oh no, I'm not on. I'm
There you
not on
are.
this.
There you are. I got you.
Wait,
I brought you in.
wait.
You're here
Are
now.
we good now? Are we still good
Yep.
now?
Now you're good.
Okay. Okay. What a weird thing. I was on screen the whole time. I was on screen. I don't know. I'm glad you pointed that out because I would have never known. However, Jrue Holiday
Yeah.
potentially exiting Boston just as I exited the screen for 2 seconds. I don't understand how that happened, but maybe to Sacramento. Sacramento. I mean, that's why I got to break out the Sacramento. Anytime you pick up a random Sacramento Kings jersey in Idaho Springs, Colorado, you got to present it on stream
Yeah.
anytime.
Yeah. It's
Anytime you're
every
talking about them,
opportunity.
right?
Yeah.
It's like you got to do it. You got to do it. But Sacramento Kings, they're potentially in on Jrue Holiday this summer. Franco, what are your thoughts on that? We've talked a lot about the Sacramento Kings, Jrue Holiday. You even have a deal you might want to
So
talk about.
I came up with this trade rumor before it was brought to Mark Stein's attention, and I was going through the rosters before, right when the New York Knicks series ended, and as a heartbroken Celtics fan, just in denial, trying to figure out what the next move is, and the Sacramento Kings really stuck out to me more than any other team as a uh, possible destination for Jrue Holiday. And looking at their team, they're a team, as I said in the beginning of the show. The West is just going to be a hellfire because you have almost every team except, and you can't even say that they're not in contention until the offseason begins. But you're looking at the West, and you have 13, 13 teams just about that look like they could potentially make some noise. And who even knows? Even Portland and Utah can even get in on some action if they make the right move, or two or three, to get back into a competing level. But looking at the Sacramento Kings, you're looking at a team that is looking for playmaking. You bring in the Chicago Kings with Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan pairing them as your wings, and you also have promising Keegan Murray, who is only 24 years old on a team option coming up this year, and Domantas Sabonis, who was acquired in the trade that allowed the Indiana Pacers to be currently playing in the NBA Finals right now. So, and they're also very open. They are under the first tax apron with 25 million, so they have some space. However, they're only going into the next season with 10 contracted players. So, looking at their starting lineup, you look at Jrue Holiday being that playmaker and filling in that position as they traded De'Aaron Fox, and being that number one guy that you can rely on to play alongside those other four players. And players that interest me, this is where the contracts become a little bit more appealing to me than anyone else because of the duration and also the value that they are coming in at. A player that I look at for almost perfect swap for Jrue Holiday is a Malik Monk. And if we want to pull, do we have my graphic in the stream?
Oh, wait a minute.
Let's.
We'll get
I'll,
that up
I'll
in a second. We'll get that
yeah,
up in a second.
I'll keep talking, but yeah, I look at a player like Malik Monk on it next year making $18.7 million, a 3-year contract, and he's only 27 years old. So you'd be able to walk into next year with him confidently on your team, and he would also be around when Jason Tatum comes back, and when him making around $20 million per year for the next 3 years, that's a very team friendly contract to have. And I think him and Derek White would be a perfect guard pairing, and it also allows for a player like Peyton Pritchard to have more access to those minutes and be able to rotate in because Blake Monk has a versatility to his game. Not as strong of a defender as Jrue Holiday, I will say. And the other player I would add in that trade to match the contracts is Jonas Valanciunas, who is the definition of a glass cleaning center that we haven't seen in Boston in just about 4 or 5 years, because you can consider Robert Williams that type of player, but he brought a lot more athleticism to the position instead of that strength and raw size that just eats up the entire paint, which Jonas Valanciunas has been able to do for years upon end. And looking at what he could be able to contribute, I think that is a solid piece. And he's also here for the next 2 years, so you'd also have him around when Jason Tatum comes back into the picture. So I see these teams matching up extremely well because the Kings would be able to move on from Malik Monk because they have two very talented young guards in the rising on their rotation, which is Devin Carter and Keon Ellis. Two very good players who are going to continue to develop into promising prospects, and they need kind of that bridge before they make that jump. I would say they need like 1 or 2 more years in the league before you start seeing them make some real progress and becoming double digit per season scorers. But with Jrue Holiday, that really solidifies that team. And you look at the Western Conference as it beefs up. Sacramento is going to be striving for anything to be able to put up battles in these play-in tournaments and so on and so forth. Because right now, the West is all win now. Right now, and you're not going to be seeing too many teams trading out and trading back. And the I think that the number 10 spot's going to be very challenging to win in the West. And the Sacramento Kings, if they make that acquisition, you're looking at the starting lineup in a playoff position. You're looking at a starting lineup of Holiday, Levine, DeRozan, Murray, and Sabonis with supporting cast off the bench. I think that's a team that could possibly light the beam a couple times and potentially make a round one appearance.
This Sacramento Kings team, to me, just complete wild card. Every single year, you have no idea what the Sacramento Kings are going to do. It's why they have Domantas Sabonis on their roster. It's why they have Zach LaVine. It's why they have DeMar DeRozan. Three players right there where I'm going. Sacramento was never on the radar for any of them, yet they have all three, and Jonas Valanciunas as well. If you want to mention him as one of those players, Sacramento, in my mind, is just. Let me get into this real quick. I'm trying to pull up your. I'm trying to pull up your graphic at the same time I'm talking about this, but the Sacramento Kings, they just they have a couple of tradable contracts the Celtics could look at. Primarily DeMar DeRozan, $24.6 million next season. I could see the world. I could see a world in which 35 for 35, right? 35-year-old DeMar DeRozan, 35-year-old Jrue Holiday. They're swapped for each other, and you could see the Celtics save a little bit of money. But this is also another thing too. DeMar DeRozan, his deal next year is only partially guaranteed. And I'm sure that comes with some stipulation on it, but that goes into the realm of retaining flexibility with future assets. You cut money this season if you're the Celtics by trading for DeMar DeRozan, and not only that, is next season you cut money as well. However, next season he's also under contract, so you could trade him as an expiring. You could trade him this upcoming season with a year and a half on his deal left. And that could be a player certainly the Celtics look at for Jrue Holiday. DeMar DeRozan, I'm not a huge fan of swapping those two players for the
Or you talk
on-court
about
value.
the more
The on-court value is not
more
there for me
less
uh,
athletic.
whatsoever. And you could, and again, in that deal, you could see throw in at the back end. I mean, the Kings have a lot of back end guys that I see potentially getting paid beyond this season. Jake LaRavia, Devin Carter, Terrence Davis, Keon Ellis, all of those guys. Primarily Keon Ellis. That is a player in which if you could get Keon Ellis for Jrue Holiday in that deal, that would be a steal for the Celtics, an absolute steal. But Keon Ellis will demand a contract after next season. He's on a team option next year, which I believe he's on his rookie deal. The Kings will definitely pick that up, $2.3 million next season, and then beyond. You're going to have to pay him if you get Keon Ellis. But all those guys, LaRavia, Carter. Well, Carter's not due money in the future, but LaRavia, Davis, and Keon Ellis, primarily Ellis, they're going to get contracts going into the future. Davis, maybe not. LaRavia, I don't think his number
Laravia
will be
would
that
have to be a sign-in trade.
It would be no, but I'm saying like all of these players, in terms of their future money, if you were to trade for any of them, like you're gonna have to pay them. LaRavia wouldn't be a high number. Davis wouldn't be a high number. Carter, he's owed money into the future. Isaac Jones, not owed. He's not going to make too much money. I mean, he might not even make a contract in the future. But Keon Ellis is a player you'd have to pay if the Celtics received him in a deal with his future money. Valanciunas, $10.4 million. Keegan Murray, 11.1. I highly doubt Keegan Murray's moved. His age, 24. Recently picked by the Sacramento Kings not too long ago. Still a very promising young player. One of the
I
more
like
efficient
their
shooters in the league.
I like when
It
they
would
make
just
the
be
trade.
idiotic if they moved him.
I like
I would love to get Keegan Murray
I like
in a
their
Jrue
PA.
Holiday swap, but I just
Oh.
that just would not. I don't. But that's the thing about the Kings. It's like the Kings are not, they're not immune to this type of deal, right? Where you send a promising young player away for an aging veteran. We just saw the Kings this decade trade away Tyrese Halliburton, who's playing Game 4 of the NBA Finals, vying to go up
At an
3-1
MVP
over the
level
Oklahoma City Thunder tonight
as the
for
number one
Domantas
player.
Sabonis. And Sabonis, he was still very young during that deal, but Halliburton was younger with even more promise. And the Kings, they pull the trigger on that deal. It's not out of the realm of possibilities the Kings go in on Jrue Holiday and trade away Keegan Murray. Who knows? But other names too. Malik Monk.
Keegan Murray. I like how they all scream his last name when the PA announcer says his first name.
I'm trying to imagine it in Eddie Palladino terms, right? Eddie Palladino's like, how is he gonna hold out the Murray or the
I don't know if
Keegan?
that would transfer over to Boston.
Why not?
Maybe it would. I think Celtics fans know enough ball to let that transfer over.
Maybe like I'm just saying experiences within Celtics Nation. You'd be surprised. I mean, I know even within our own confines of our own program, you'd be surprised how many people are just Celtics lovers and haters of everybody else. Like they don't even want to. It's like what are the Portland Trailblazers doing today? I don't care. We're all about Celtics Nation. Not me. I'm saying other people out there. So I don't know. I don't know from that perspective. Just saying.
Yeah,
But
but
I'm trying to pull up your trade here real quick because having some difficulty getting it on stream from behind the scenes here. But your trade, and it mentions a name in which I was about to mention is Malik Monk. Malik Monk and Jonas Valanciunas in my mind, which we're likely going to get into here in a minute. Those are two players in which the Celtics could attain for asset accumulation later on down the line. A big theme of this live today has been asset accumulation for the Celtics behind the scenes. We haven't upfront talked about it, but in all of these deals, a common theme of the Celtics potentially moving Jrue Holiday is retaining further assets later on down the line and potentially assets that you could trade in smaller increments because if you're paying Jrue Holiday 32, 34, 37 million dollars, that's a lot harder to move than say a $14 million deal, a $16 million deal, especially if those are expiring or if those are only 2-year deals and they don't own a ton of money over time. Uh, a theme of the Celtics, in these talks is asset accumulation. Can the Celtics get can they receive smaller contracts for Jrue Holiday? They could maybe wheel and deal later on down the line individually. Malik Monk and Jonas Valanciunas could be those names potentially. And I'm gonna try to get your trade. Go ahead and talk about your trade. We're gonna get it up here real quick while you're talking about it. But Franco has a deal in which includes these two players, and I think this definitely. I think the trade. I think the trade it's a viable deal. It's a viable deal. We'll have it up here in a second.
So you guys are all going to be receiving. We're still in the production of it. I am going to be releasing my mock off seasons. I'm going to run through every scenario that the Celtics can go through, from staying home with their roster all the way to the Jaylen Brown conversations, which I barely like to entertain. But as a Boston media,
We did
we have
for
to
like 40
entertain
minutes
anything.
yesterday.
Yeah, yeah. We, as a Boston media personality, we need to invest into those. But this first mock off season I made is one that I see as the most realistic within my own eyes, and moving forward and trying to build this team into a team that can not only be able to compete with just Jaylen Brown within their starting lineup, but to also be able to branch over and bridge over into the upcoming season after, when Jason Tatum returns. And when the Brad Stevens ideal roster should, once Tatum is back, you are back into the heavy favorites to be NBA champion in the 2026-2027 season. And this trade for Jrue Holiday, in the Kings' perspective, I explained it a little earlier before. You're getting a veteran point guard when you're in a very tight knit, very competitive Western Conference to etch out your starting five. And as a starting five on paper, you'd be able to bring that in. So the Celtics would be receiving Malik Monk, Jonas Valanciunas, and the 2029 first round pick, which, keep in mind, the Celtics have lost in the Derek White trade a few years ago to Sacramento, and the San Antonio, pardon me, and the Kings would be receiving the Jrue Holiday, the Celtics 2025 first round pick, and a 2031 second round pick, just to even out the trade numbers and the draft value when you're looking at a later round pick. And a reason why I see the Celtics including this first round pick in this trade is the Sacramento Kings do not hold a first round pick this year. So when you're looking at a team that only has 10 active players who are under contract going into next year, you look at adding a first round draft pick as much more valuable than a second round draft pick, because of the contract that you can give them and the fact that you can maintain them on the start of day lineup. And the Celtics would be improving, and this is even with or without moving on from Kristaps. If the Celtics hypothetically can't get rid of Kristaps and Al Horford and Luke Cornett walk out of the building, Jonas Valanciunas is a very solidified option for the Celtics to take advantage of that and be able to move forward and kind of have that versatility, because it's not like you can't play Valanciunas and Kristaps on the court at the same time. But when Kristaps Porzingis is out, Jonas Valanciunas would step in. And the two things that really appealed to me for these two players is their availability. I think that Jonas Valanciunas played 80 out of 84 games last year, because they did make the play-in tournament. and Malik Monk was just around the same. And looking at the future of this team, availability is the best ability when you're looking at what they need to accomplish next season to remain a competitive team. It's adding depth and durability, and those two players are exemplary of that. And I feel like Malik Monk could end up having that jump over in Boston that we saw Derek White have when he was added to this team. And the having the guard pairing alongside throwing in Baylor Shireman and then JD Davison, who is also on a contract, but those guys are on the back end of your roster. But in your primary rotation for your three guards to be Derek White, Malik Monk, and Peyton Pritchard, it adds a lot more confidence to their offense, a lot more firepower. You're kind of swapping out the offense for defense, but I think that there's enough defense within the squad that it can negate for the loss of Jrue Holiday, and it's also just about getting younger. Jonas Valanciunas is 32 years old, but as a big man, those years aren't as different in what you're going to get out of them. The regression isn't as noticeable when it comes to big men. It usually, especially of his archetype, which is a down low player, it's just being able to get up and down the court. And Jonas hasn't shown any slowing down in that area of his game. And I don't think we'll see that within those 2 years. And also just being able to get that future first round draft pick, you're getting the best of both worlds, and also the Kings are getting into a position to be able to at least try to compete in the tough Western Conference.
The Kings, in my mind, the Kings, I have no idea what they're gonna do. And this deal right here, I can see the Kings doing this just because they're the Kings. All right. I just their roster to me lends itself to so many, like there's so many outcome scenarios that could happen with the Sacramento Kings because their roster is all over the place. It's simply all over the place. And what's funny is last year coming into the season, I looked at the Kings and went, why does it feel like the Kings are trying to go away from modern basketball? It's like their team, and I shouldn't even say modern basketball, but just non-versatile basketball, right? Stagnant, static players who are only good at maybe one thing, right? Who aren't multi-capable in multiple areas, right? Multi-skilled on the floor, defensively, offensively, versatile, right? Who aren't versatile. Their roster, Levine, Sabonis, DeRozan, Monk, Murray, Valanciunas, those are your top six players right there.
Yikes.
I'm sorry. Before the Kings ever want to contend in the Western Conference or even think about a championship, because it's not just about the finals for the Kings. It's about, can you make it past the first round? Congratulations, they made they couldn't make the playoffs for 15 years. The Kings couldn't make the playoffs for 15 years. Made it in 2023, and that was kind of a fluky year in my mind. Like, oh, very offensive oriented team. They were beat by a more defensive oriented team in the Warriors with a lot of offensive creation. Obviously, Steph Curry, the defending champions that year in the Warriors. They lost to the Warriors in the first round in a 7-game series, which was a very interesting series. But the Kings, it was kind of a fluky year for them. It's like, oh, one of the best offensive teams in NBA history. They're beat by a more experienced defensive oriented team who offensively, I mean, there's a lot of creation within the Warriors. And then the Warriors get smacked by the 7 seed Lakers in the second round. The Kings, as a built roster in 2023, there was no long-term viability with that roster. Now it's completely different because De'Aaron Fox not even in the building anymore. Now you're running with Zach LaVine and DeRozan and Valanciunas and Sabonis. I think there's definitely potential for him to be moved soon because I don't think he's looking at this situation thinking anything good about it. I think he wants to compete. He's seeing his former team compete right now because of the deal in which sent him to Sacramento. He's 29 years old, making $43.6 million next season. I could see Sabonis move this summer. Maybe the Celtics get a little frisky. Just saying, maybe they trade Jrue Holiday somewhere. Maybe they trade Jrue Holiday somewhere, and then maybe, just maybe, they also send Sam Hauser out and receives a Domantas Sabonis in return. Maybe it's a 3-team deal. Maybe it's a multi, a simultaneous type of deal situation where Hauser's moved elsewhere and the Celtics go out and get Sabonis. It could happen like that. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe the Celtics, they're in on Sabonis. But the Kings, this is my view on the Kings. Everybody's expendable. Literally everybody. If they want to get themselves into contention in the Western Conference, everybody's on the table. Levine's on the table. Sabonis. I understand they just acquired Levine during the trade deadline, which made absolutely no sense. That was just a highly confused. I would have loved to see Zach LaVine on an actual contending roster, a roster that had a legitimate direction. Instead, he's on the Sacramento Kings roster that's going to be a perpetual 10 seed in the West.
I think everybody's
expendable.
I thought that. What was my projected trade?
They pretty much have to rearrange this whole roster if they want to get back to contention. So everybody's on the table. Like, bottom line.
Pretty much.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I remember my predicted trade was Zach LaVine to the Nuggets. I think that would have been a much more fitting scenario for him. But now in Sacramento, it's more of a scenario where you need to make the best of what you have, because you really put together a team that is built to make a final run, and like not even like a final run, but like these guys are all nearing past their prime. So this is like their year. If there is going to be a year that Sacramento wants to continue living on this hype that they are trying to create within their team, this buzz, this don't worry.
I don't know what hype.
I mean, it's challenging, but like if you're trying to like ride out this vision, trust the process, if you will. If they're trying to trust the process, this is the final year that process can be happening. If not, it was messed up when they started to trade away all their young talent. But you can't look at the past if you're the Sacramento Kings, and bringing in Jrue Holiday for Malik Monk, it might take away a little bit of depth, but if they're adding a late round first round pick and Jrue Holiday, and the Celtics are able to accumulate two players who are very not productive enough players that you can slot into playoff minutes and not rely on. But if they're your fourth or fifth guys on the court and they're rotating in, let's say Jonas Valanciunas next year, there's another center on the team. There's no problem with the Valanciunas coming off the bench. Likewise with Malik Monk, let's say that a Pritchard makes a jump, you could have that versatility within those guys, and I feel like both teams would be a little bit more comfortable with the situation that they're going into. The market, the Kings would have a little bit more of like something to market. You could put a starting five on a media day poster and be like, "This is the starting five," and people would be like, "All right, let's see what they can do against the." I can't even tell you what teams are going to be in the play-in tournament for the West next year, because it's
some random 14. I mean, the West is so deep that the 4 teams for the play. I mean, think 2 of them. It took till the final day of the season to figure out 2 of them this season, in which the 9 and the 10. Meanwhile, the 9 and the 10, they were 8 games behind the 7 and the 8 this season. So I mean, it's going to be 4 random teams. It could be 4 teams. You could see a team at the bottom of the conference like the Blazers in there, and you could see a team at the top of the conference like the Nuggets in there, or even the Rockets from last year. You could that is certainly a possibility.
Yeah, so I feel like due to that factor, if the Kings want to continue to keep up with the pace of what's going on out there and being able to put on a competition and make an argument for what they are potentially capable of, this trade is probably the best route to it, unless you can find a better deal that involves a few of your key players. Like, let's say you can get rid of a DeRozan and DeRozan and a Valanciunas, and bring in maybe a younger point guard like a Darius Garland, Jordan Poole. I'm just running through the names I've heard on the market, but I don't see teams being interested in that, and they already blew their chance with having a young guard when they traded away De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton. So if they're going to make this final push, I think this trade makes a lot of sense for both sides.
Yeah, and I'll say the Kings. I want to touch on this too. Malik Monk and Jonas Valanciunas, and we got to compartmentalize all of these different teams and packages with, or I should say, we have to compartmentalize these different packages, but we also have to kind of look at them in relevance with the other packages in which we've been talking about today. The Kings, this is where I wonder if there's an impasse between the Celtics and Kings. I think the Celtics can get more out of Jrue Holiday from other teams compared to the Sacramento Kings. The biggest appealing thing from the Kings to me is their picks. Can you extract a future first round pick out of the Sacramento Kings that might be pretty valuable later on down the line? The
Well, that
Kings, they're not
2029
immune
first,
to giving up something valuable to themselves later on down the line. That's just the way it
that
is.
if that 2029 pick is unprotected, that means that
Right.
that season you're going into the season where DeMar DeRozan is most likely retired. You're looking at the season where Zach LaVine is most likely retired, and you're looking at a season where Domantas Sabonis is most likely on a different team or traded,
And
or
but
yeah.
see that this is
But
the thing too. You mentioned that
the
unprotected
Kings,
pick in the future. That pick could also be something the Kings don't want to give up because of their situation right now. So on one hand, it could be we could extract a pick out of the Kings because they want Jrue Holiday, and that's what they do. They give up future first round picks for him. But also there could be a world in which the Kings they don't want to give up future first round picks because of their situation they're in. And then that also brings into view the other deals. Are the Clippers willing to give up picks? Are the Mavericks willing to give up picks? If they're willing to give up picks, if the Clippers, Mavericks, another suitor out there is willing to give up picks, are the Sacramento Kings with what they're offering from a player perspective, Monk, Valanciunas, whoever it is, are they going to have enough to complete a deal without picks? I would say that would be a no. They would have to add picks, and under those circumstances, they might be reluctant. But I'll say from a Celtics perspective too, they might be reluctant on Malik Monk and Jonas Valanciunas' assets. Now you mentioned their availability. I think both of those guys are one-dimensional players, straight up. That I don't see them as very versatile players. That being said, they could come in to the building and this is one of the notes I have here. Um, if the Celtics take the route of asset accumulation this summer, receiving assets in which could perform and boost their stock during a bridge season in Boston could be important in adding leverage to the Celtics' ability to build another title winning roster in the future. And looking at Malik Monk and Jonas Valanciunas, specifically with Malik Monk, there could be a world in there where Malik Monk, the Celtics trade for Malik Monk, and Malik Monk boosts his value with the Celtics in that one season, the bridge season. They could be assets for that, no doubt. But I will say they're one-dimensional players. Maybe if there are more efficient players out there like PJ Washington, like Daniel Gafford, if there are more suitors, maybe the Celtics look at Monk and Valanciunas and go, okay, they're simply assets. Yes, there's potential here on the horizon that Monk or even Valanciunas could boost their stock during a bridge season. But I will say just as you know this could be with the Celtics just asset accumulation. I look at the on court with Monk and Valanciunas. That's the thing with Gafford and Washington. On court, it's going to work. Gafford, the defensive oriented center he is. Washington, the versatile forward he is. It's going to work on court. Monk and Valanciunas, I don't know if it's going to work on court as well, but there is that vision in the long run of asset accumulation, like Dennis Schroeder, like Josh Richardson, like Al Horford. Al Horford obviously is here for the long term, but those two guys specifically back in 2021 in his freedom, right? It's the asset accumulation, not efficient players, but players you may be able to deal later on down the line for better players. And the grand example of that is Derek White. Josh Richardson. Just think, if the Celtics don't go out and get Josh Richardson in the summer of 2021, they don't get Derek White. It wasn't all Josh Richardson getting Derek White, but his contract had a lot to do with that transaction, and even his value with the team. So, discussing it with the Kings, the two things that I look at is on court and potentially the picks later on down the line. Maybe the Kings are a little bit more reluctant, and maybe the on-court fit isn't as well with the Celtics with Monk and Valanciunas and whoever else, maybe DeRozan, versus other teams like the Mavericks or Clippers that might have more efficient players, specifically the Mavericks, and two teams who might be willing to give up future picks, specifically the Mavericks, who are now they're in a stage where Cooper Flag and all these assets on the roster. The Mavericks could get real crazy this summer with what they try to give up and try to get from the market. However, looking at potentially other destinations, the three main teams we were focusing on today, the Mavericks, the Kings, the Clippers, those are the three primary destinations for Jrue Holiday, it seems right now. Those are the three teams that have been rumored out in the hoops hype world, in the Twitter world, the Instagram world, however people get their rumors nowadays, mostly the Twitter world. The Kings, Clippers, and Mavericks have been the three confirmed teams in on Jrue Holiday. Every other team seems to be just kind of conversation, speculation. But from your perspective, Franco, who are some other teams that could be in on Jrue Holiday out there outside of the Mavericks, Kings, and Clippers?
Well, this is how I usually determine who I would consider to be interested. I usually just run down the standings. Cavaliers most likely wouldn't be interested. The New York Knicks most likely wouldn't be interested. The Indiana Pacers definitely wouldn't be interested. The Milwaukee Bucks, I don't think they're looking for that reunion.
I don't know why they would do that. I have no Milwaukee is not in a position to do anything because Damian Lillard making $54 million next year on a torn Achilles, that is catastrophic to everything with that, because they're role players. They don't own any value. Kuzma and Connaughton, you can get up to $30 million with those two players on the trade market, but they don't own any value. Connaughton doesn't own any value. Kuzma doesn't own any value. You don't have any assets to trade it for the Bucks outside of Giannis, which is why Giannis trade makes sense for the Bucks this summer. That's the one asset the Bucks have left. Brooke Lopez might be gone in free agency.
Right.
Just the whole, it's catastrophic.
Yeah.
Type of injury for the Bucks. Obviously for Damian Lillard, the player he is, the guard he is, the type of guard, the age, but also to the Bucks situation. That Achilles tear was seriously catastrophic. No way the Bucks look at Jrue Holiday. Absolutely no way. No. If anything, they look at tanking. It's like that's way more likely than looking at Jrue Holiday. And Jrue Holiday wouldn't want to go back to the Bucks. No, I'm sure he'd be championship, but no. When you're swept away from a situation like that too, like he thought he was gonna retire and maybe end his career in Milwaukee.
Right.
Things happen in the NBA, didn't happen, but I'm sure there's maybe some resentment there from Jrue.
And the Bucks probably should have considered running Jrue and Damian Lillard as their two guards when they made that trade. I don't think that they were able to make that trade with the Jrue still on the roster. So it's kind of hard for me to see the reasoning of why they would move on from him. They could have went into that season with a starting lineup of Dame, Holiday, Middleton. Well, he still had a decent chance of promising legs about 2 years ago. Giannis and Brooke Lopez and Bobby Portis coming off the bench. That's a very, very, very talented starting lineup. But I just think that getting rid of that guard to play next to what's gonna call it, Damian Lillard with Jrue going to the Celtics kind of put him in a very rough position. Oh,
Sure. 100%. But other destinations for Jrue Holiday, you were running through the standings
yeah.
there.
So
Kind of
back
got
to it.
stuck on Milwaukee,
Yep,
but yeah, Milwaukee is
yep.
just kind of at a
Yeah, we'll stop as we go, but I didn't really have to talk about New York or Indiana. That's pretty self-explanatory. New York is going to be making a move, it's going to be for something
would,
stupid. It's going to
would you
be
trade I mean, would Brunson for Holiday? Would that ever I feel like yeah, okay, maybe. Like the Knicks wouldn't do that. No. No.
but back to it. Pistons, I don't see that happening. They are looking pretty good at point guard, obviously, with Kate Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, once he returns back from injury, Marcus Sasser. They have a lot of young talent, and they're a team that's going to continue to grow and continue to ascend in the rankings and standings. Asar Thompson as well. So the uh, the Pistons have really no need for him. Orlando Magic, they're looking for a point guard. I know that for a fact. That's been the rumor. However, I don't think that Jrue Holiday is the upgrade that they are looking for. They're looking for a more offensive-minded team, scoring point guard. I would the names that have been tied to Orlando so far and just trade rumors. Not sure how much volatility there are to these guys, but Lonzo Ball, Trey Young, and Anthony Simons, kind of these younger point guards who are very offensive minded players that can really just add to the Orlando Magic because they have all the talent in the world when it comes to the defensive end, but if they can just add that pure primed scorer to that team, that really puts them in a position to compete with a team like Indiana. And moving on from them, so Orlando is a no. Atlanta Hawks, definitely not with Dyson Daniels and Trey Young. I don't see any world where any of those swaps make sense. Chicago Bulls, um, I don't see that happening either, just because the way they're constructed and kind of how much of a shit show it is over there with point guards. There, you talk about the Dallas Mavericks having a logjam at point guard. You look over here at Chicago: Lonzo Ball, Kobe White, Kevin Huerter, um, Ayo Dosunmu, Javon Carter. Uh, Jalen Terry. So they are pretty stacked at the point guard position. Maybe, just maybe, if somehow Chicago sees the value in Jrue White, if the Celtics could get one of those young assets in return a um for Jrue Holiday, that is major. Miami Heat, no, I don't think so. They are in need of a point guard, and I think that they're going to be a team that's going to try to make a move, but I'm not sure if it's going to be for Jrue Holiday. They're looking for that big name player to kind of fill in as the face of the team. So I don't see that being what Jrue would be looking for. Toronto Raptors. Toronto Raptors, I feel more confident with rolling forward with quickly RJ Barrett and Grady Dick as my guards, and they also have a lot more young assets. So that would be a nullified trade. Brooklyn Nets, I I doubt it if they would want that, especially if they're looking to trade up in the draft, which I expect them to do. And it wouldn't really add too much to their team that they couldn't add in free agency. 76ers, no, obviously, with Maxey and McCain. Um, You look at the Hornets, probably not. They might add a defensive guard to play alongside Lonzo if they don't end up trading him. So maybe that would work out in that sense, but I see them utilizing that draft pick to do that, which is the number 4 pick. Wizards, no, just because I don't think Jrue deserves to be thrown. It's like that scene in Toy Story where when you get traded to the Washington Wizards, I think of that scene of in Toy Story where Andy throws away Woody into the box, and he's like, "Bye, Woody. I don't want to play with you anymore." Like that's like your
Marcus
retirement.
Smart, Chris Middleton.
Yeah, that's your sayonara from your next chance. Your next stop after Washington is probably Guangdong or Puerto Rico. Now looking at the West, as we've already went through a few teams over here, Thunder probably not. I don't see any need for that, especially with the guard play they have. Rockets, you can dance around with the idea if they're trying to move around from Fred VanVleet, but I think they have a bigger move ahead of them. And would probably be looking for a bigger name. LA
Wait, I want
Lakers.
to pause you right there. The Rockets and Spurs are two teams that could, in my mind, go out and get anybody this summer.
Yes.
I think they have to
Yeah.
be mentioned for everybody. But specifically for the Rockets, I don't think Jrue Holiday would make sense for the Rockets because they're more into the youth movement, and I don't
The Spurs and
think
Rockets have their pick of the litter. Like
I don't understand why with all the assets the Rockets and even Spurs, like I'll throw the Spurs into the conversation.
hell, even
I
the
don't
Thunder
understand
as
why
the
they
NBA
would.
Finals
I
team.
don't know why they would turn in their young assets or picks in the future for 35-year-old Jrue Holiday.
Yeah.
Especially when they're on a young tangent. You want to be adding on players who are 26, 27, 28, not players who are 35. That just the Spurs and Rockets could do anything they wanted to with all the assets they have this summer and the situations they're in. But 35-year-old Jrue Holiday just doesn't seem like a fit in either one of those locations, San Antonio or Houston.
And I even include the Thunder into that conversation with the Rockets and Spurs, even though they're in the NBA Finals, which is
that is weird.
Terrifying.
You mentioned the Thunder; they're like the third version of the Spurs and Rockets, but they're already there. It's like they're
already there,
through.
But they
Big game tonight, by the way. I don't know. The Thunder kind of blowing their chance to win a title.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe they lose this final and I still one of my in my NBA mock trades, I still see the Thunder being a team that could land Giannis, and they could do it feasibly and financially, and they would still be in a safe position, which is absolutely crazy to think about, that they could have two MVP caliber players on the same team.
That is a huge question waiting for the offseason, though. And what we're waiting on is the result of the finals. If the Thunder don't win the finals, it's like how aggressive does that team get on the trade market or just in the offseason in general? How aggressive do the Thunder actually get? You're talking about Giannis there. They could get that aggressive. If you don't win the title and you're going,
they could win a championship.
We have a young core, but we didn't make it. Like we had a 68 win team, but we couldn't get past the hump. It's like you could see a Thunder team going, look, we were so dominant last year. Maybe not sacrificing all that dominance, all the pieces, but maybe not for all. What I'm saying here is maybe they don't sacrifice their whole entire roster for a guy like Giannis, but they can certainly still be aggressive and add on to their rotation, or at least upgrade their rotation as well. The Thunder are still very much in that category of the Spurs and Rockets, the young up and coming teams with assets to move and many different directions they can take. But the Thunder aren't seen as that because they're already in the NBA Finals. They're already here, but they're still very much in that Rockets Spurs category of. I mean, just think about this: the Thunder are the second youngest team in the NBA on average by average age.
Yeah, and
That's
in the
insane.
next 6 years, they have 29 draft picks. 29. They physically cannot service.
Right.
They physically cannot service the amount of draft assets that they have. They physically cannot continue to have the amount of depth that they have. Like, they're going to need to start to narrow down on the quantity of players that they have and looking at their bench, and they're going to really need to. They can still bring in a quality guy that really just kind of slims down that starting lineup, but it's probably going to be one of the better starting lineups that we've ever seen. And it could be a starting lineup that could come. It would be comparable to what the Celtics did, and if not even scarier, because you'd be looking at. There's a potential that there's a starting lineup out there with SGA, Caruso, Jalen Williams, Giannis, and Chet. I mean, sure, if the Bucks were to negotiate with them, I'm sure that either Chet or Jalen Williams would have to be involved in that conversation. Uh, but still. But moving on with Jrue Holiday, looking at the Lakers, maybe maybe a little bit of interest. Lavengers type of that would be a Lavengers type of move. You're trying to get a piece next to LeBron as he's trying to win a final championship. I don't see how that really adjusts things for him. And you'd be acquiring. They have enough play. The Lakers are a team that's very poised to make a move as well. However, they're going to have to make a move that isn't very as appealing as people expect it to be. So, like, that's why we'll get into this later on when we begin to talk about Porzingis. That's why I think they're a valid option to trade for Porzingis, because the guys that they have to offer aren't as really valuable to another team. You look at Rui Hachimura, the only guy that really has that type of value is Austin Reeves, but I I I don't see the Lakers really making do away from him unless there's a offer that really knocks them off their feet. But Gabe Vincent, Maxi Kleber, both making $11 million. That is absolutely garbage. So they're going to be two asset players that would be moved on from. But I
Kleba
don't.
and Vincent
I would
for
see the
Kyle
yeah
Kuzma. Would you
yeah
do that?
that the,
That might actually that might happen this summer, straight up.
yeah that I'm sure. But yeah,
That works out. Two $11 million deals for a $22 million deal, and
yeah.
it's
Who
here's your
knows?
garbage for my garbage. Maybe.
Yeah. But going further, so Lakers, I mean, uh, I don't see that happening. So Lakers, I will consider I'll consider them a no, unless there were other moves made around. Um, Nuggets, I don't see that happening. I don't
It's
see the
hard. It would
Nuggets
have to be like Michael Porter Jr. and
right, and I don't see the Nuggets seeing those guys, Michael Porter Jr. as a swappable player for Jrue Holiday, but it could make sense. Jamal Murray and Jrue Holiday in the starting lineup together. That could look good. But I just don't see that being a move that I see falling through. Especially with Christian Brown moving up the ranks there. Um, Clippers we already talked about. They're obviously on the table. Timberwolves can be an interesting team because I don't see them replacing an old man with another old man with swapping out Mike Conley, who 37 years old. He's in the same boat as Al Horford because they were in the same draft class. Um, maybe Mike Conley could go. Maybe they could swap that out, but I see Dillingham being the guy that they really put the weight on as being the next guy to fill in for Conley and continue to use Conley as the bridge. So I'll say no to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Warriors, I don't see them being interested, especially with what they got going on, and they really can't afford to bring in a Jrue Holiday. They're they're in a really rough salary cap position if you look at their team with Draymond. Well, Jimmy Butler making $54 million is just absurd and is going to be the absolute death of Curry's chances of ever winning a ring again. So no,
It
no
was a
to that.
desperation move when it happened. It's like there's no other move to be made. Like you
I
have to do
mean,
something if you're the Warriors with
let,
Curry and Draymond.
hold on.
You have to do something.
Let me see if this trade works, and then I'll say no.
Well,
I was thinking if the Celtics moved, or the Warriors moved Buddy Hield and what's it called, Moody, that could work, but it doesn't work out financially. Grizzlies, no, maybe, unless you're
the Grizzlies. I'm just
because
saying
it
the
would just be a
Grizzlies.
rinse and repeat of the Marcus Smart trade. That's how I would feel about that trade. It would just be rinse and repeat of what they had there, but who knows? Maybe that could be the guard that you could pair next to Morant. I know Bane has played more of a small forward position before in his career, and Trey Wells, but I would say no to
Yeah,
them.
you'd be looking at Jaren Jackson, maybe Brandon Clark. The thing is about some of these teams, when I'm talking about the intermediate contracts, the contracts that are, in my mind, tradable, the contracts that are 15, 20, $25 million. John Morant makes 39. Desmond Bane makes $37.7 million. Jaren, and then after that, you have Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clark. Those are your two tradable contracts in my mind. You could trade Bane; he has value. He's long term. He's under a long term
What could have been
deal. You don't have to
Celtics?
worry about paying him in the future, or anything like that. Morant, high deal. Like both of those deals, you could move them if you wanted to, but they're not as tradable because of their number. Jackson and Clark, those are the two tradable contracts in my mind. $23.4 million for Jaren Jackson, and then 12.5. The only problem is here, Jaren Jackson's 25 years old, Brandon Clark is 28. Why would the Grizzlies trade either one of those players? What? What? Nope. Well, nope. I'm reading a Sintel post right now. I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on here? It's like, no, 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 no. Not giving it out. Not giving it out here. But Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clark, they're 28 and 25. They're younger players. And the Grizzlies do have to pay Jaren Jackson going into the future. Maybe the Celtics, maybe they want to take on that responsibility. Like that could be something the
You'd have to
Celtics
move.
look at and go, oh, we want to take on that future responsibility. If Memphis doesn't want to, maybe that's something out there. Who knows? Everybody else on the roster, Conchar, Zach Edey, Jay Huff, Vince Williams, Scottie Pippen Jr., Gigi Jackson, Jalen Wells, some really nice players in there if you're Memphis under some really great deals, but none of them are really that tradable of contracts because in my mind they're all valuable. They're all valuable. They're all 6 million or below outside of Conchar. He's $6.2 million, but every other deal is, well, Zach Edey is almost exactly 6 million. $6.5 million and below for all the rest of these deals. They're all under future money because they're all under their rookie deals. I don't see the Grizzlies moving off.
Right.
I mean, maybe
Unless there's like
maybe in a right, and maybe in a deal where maybe they trade Brandon Clark or Bane and they add in another young guy to get more assets from another team in a deal, maybe. But the Grizzlies just have a lot of good contracts on the back end of the roster, and Clark is really the only guy I would see them potentially trading. It seems like they have to do way more than that to compete next year, because let's face it, the Grizzlies were mollywopped in round one with this roster. But there are a lot of young guys on the back end, and it's maybe like if Jack's like Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark, it's like maybe just saying.
they would
But
just
I
be
wouldn't
dumb
count them in though. They don't
yeah.
have a lot of tradable deals. That's just bottom line. Not a lot of tradable deals. It would probably have to be Jaren Jackson or Clark, and either one of those. I feel like it's one's way too low for Jrue Holiday, and one's too high,
And
right?
yeah.
It's like Jaren Jackson way more valuable than Jrue Holiday, and Brandon Clark just not valuable enough. So bottom line with the Grizzlies.
Yep. So now we're on to Kings and Mavericks. We've already given you 2 hours of content on them, so I won't continue to feed into that. But they are both a yes. The Phoenix Suns, maybe. No, I don't.
Okay,
think
I
that's
think they could do it if they
They
did
could.
it in a big Durant deal
Yes, that
or a
would
Booker
be
deal. Or a
that would
Beal. I mean, Beal deal. It's no trade clause. I understand, but maybe he finds a destination. Who knows? Probably not going to happen. But in a big deal for either any of those three, that's the only way it gets done for the Suns. Outside of that, the Suns cannot move anybody outside of those three, Beal, Booker, Durant, and get Jrue Holiday. They just can't.
right.
I mean, the contracts don't add up. The Suns, even the roster spots won't add up. It's like you could add in your next 9 guys, and it might not. And it's like, well, that barely. I'm well. You could add in your next. Let me look at the Suns salary sheet real quick to get a real number on this, just to put it into perspective when it comes to Phoenix. Let's see, Phoenix. So if you didn't trade Booker, Beal, Durant, right, for Jrue Holiday, the Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, they make 26 combined. Then you're getting into Cody Martin, Micic, Nick Richards, Ryan Dunn,
And
Iguodaro.
also
Uh,
under the second apron, you can't combine those, so it wouldn't work anyways.
right. So if you're not dealing any of those three players at the top, Durant, Beal, Booker away, it gets really hard. There's 2 tradable contracts, 3, 4 in my mind. I mean, you could trade all these after Beal, Durant, Booker, really. But to add up to that Jrue Holiday number, it's going to have to be Allen and O'Neal, and that doesn't even add up to the number. You'd have to add in another number to that deal. But you already said it. They're not able to aggregate contracts unless they made another. So that's why the Suns are in a very. Durant is gone this summer in my mind. I don't know where he goes because
Um,
we've talked about Durant a lot on
my
the Celtics Nation
my
Rise
thought is
podcast, but Durant is just not in a situation that is going to yield them a ton of assets. But he's making $54.7 million next season. I think in a big deal they could acquire. Say I brought up the deal, and we'll bring it up when we rip trades on here in a couple days from now. But I brought up Durant to Miami, Hero to Boston, and Holiday to Phoenix. And there were a lot of other picks and players and things moving around in that deal, but maybe it's possible in a 3-team deal with the Suns, um, that the Celtics trade Jrue to the Suns, and they're not getting anything from in my mind, they're not getting anything from the Suns in that deal. They're getting something from another team. That's the bottom line with the Suns. They would have to get something from another team. So the Suns, I would definitely count them out. Is that the end of the West teams?
no.
You got more.
We got the bottom shelf, and then Trailblazers probably not. I don't see that. It would be a reunion for him. After he was traded there from for Damian Lillard. Um, but nope. Simons, Scoot Henderson, Shaden Sharp. I would take any of those guys over them, and they don't really need a bridge player like Holiday to fill in for them until they're up to speed. Spurs, like we said earlier, are in a position to be able to trade for anyone, but Jrue Holiday is definitely not what they need, especially when they already have Castle, De'Aaron Fox, and depends on what they do with that pick. I don't see them going into next season with um, all three Harper, Stephon Castle, and De'Aaron Fox. I just don't see that being a viable option alongside Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson. I see them trading out of that pick and getting another veteran out of the league. Um, the Pelicans probably not. Pelicans are just their own in their own hell. Um, they got
The
CJ McCollum, so that would be just a reunion, but no one from the. It would be like showing up to your high school reunion, but no one that was in your grade would be there. And Utah Jazz, I don't think Danny Ainge is too in love with Jrue Holiday and for that. And I also think Keyshawn George or not Keyshawn George. I believe that's the what's it called? Keontae George. Um, Keontae George and Colin Sexton hold much more value than Jrue Holiday. So, in summary, the teams that are interested in Jrue Holiday or potentially could be interested in Jrue Holiday are the not really too many teams in the East that would consider it. Possibly the Bulls, possibly the Heat. Other than that, then the three teams we talked about earlier today, which is the Kings, Clippers, and Mavericks. So those are the 5 teams that we've kind of, or 14, 3 to 5 teams that we've narrowed it down to that could potentially be interested in a Jrue Holiday move. But yeah,
I'm going to go through these teams here in a second. Could there be a Cavaliers, Darius Garland's in there? Is that stupid to think?
that's silly.
Is that I feel
Hogwash.
I feel like the
That's
Cavs
hogwash.
just wouldn't do that, but I don't know. I mean, you're trading away a player if you're the Cavs and Darius Garland who can't defend for a player who can and Jrue Holiday. Nah, I wouldn't do that. I mean, I
No.
wouldn't. There's no way I would do that. But starting, I was looking at some teams here. You mentioned teams potentially interested in Jrue Holiday. The 3 main ones we talked about today: Clippers, Mavericks, the Clippers, the Mavericks, and the Sacramento Kings. Those are by far, in my mind, the 3 suitors. If you look at it in the Eastern Conference, the Cavs, Knicks, Pacers, Bucks, don't see it. The Pistons, you mentioned a team that wouldn't be interested in Jrue Holiday. I could see it because if you look at the Pistons salary sheet, they do have one player in particular who could own some. Like they have Tobias Harris on their roster, who's making $26 million next year, in which the Celtics could look at and go, all right, not making future money. Tobias Harris, we'll have to pay him 26 next year. We do cut some money off of Drew's deal next year. And Tobias, he might command a smaller salary moving into the future, a future in which we don't know what's going to happen with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. And even next season, we mentioned with Rob earlier, the Celtics rotation, their forward rotation sucked last year. Let's just face it. It was Brown, Tatum, and Hauser. Without Tatum, it's a complete disaster. Maybe you swap Holiday for Tobias Harris, and that's a viable deal that falls the Celtics' way. Who knows? Maybe there's another asset involved or multiple assets involved. For the Pistons, I don't see that making I see it making a little bit of sense, but not a ton because of the guard rotation. Again, you said, Cunningham's there, Jaden Ivey's there, Ron Holland even at age
After.
going on age 20 is going to be there. You do, and even off the bench too. Marcus
Yeah.
Sasser. I don't think he's I don't think he's a throwaway. Even you talk about Hardaway, Malik Beasley. Are they going to be back in the rotation next season? That's where I see this becoming a little unlikely because of how many guards Detroit has, and the fact if you're giving up a Ford, if you're Detroit, right, and Tobias Harris,
You're just becoming smaller.
you're right. You're becoming a little smaller there. You might get better defensively, but you're becoming a lot smaller. So Detroit, there's a possibility with Detroit, but it's, I would say, a fairly slim possibility. Um, Isaiah Stewart, $15 million contract. Detroit's an interesting destination because of Harris, but also Isaiah Stewart, $15 million, and they have some cap room. So there's going to be, with Detroit, they have the ability to add some money onto their books, whereas some other deals, you're going to have to get a third team involved, or you're going to have to make the money work by taking on smaller salaries if you're the Celtics. So Detroit could be a team, maybe. Um, and looking at the rest of the Eastern Conference, the Magic, I think the Magic, they have some young guards there, but KCP, maybe he's on the table. If the Celtics could get KCP from the Magic for Jrue Holiday, that would be interesting. I think the Magic would be interested in that potentially with more assets. I mean, I think the Celtics could be interested too with more assets on the table, even outside of KCP. Now, the Magic might not want to do that, but it would be an
They need
intriguing
offense.
swap. It would
Unless
be an
they want,
intriguing swap.
unless they want to lean completely into screw it. We are going
It
to
would be
score
kind of a
less.
lateral move, though, if you traded KCP
Yeah.
for Jrue. You would have to find, you'd have to find other players. And
Yeah.
that's the thing with the Magic is some of the other players in which the Celtics could find in return, like just not great assets. You look at it's like the assets in return. A lot of young guys for the Orlando Magic in general. So you just have that as an impasse. When a team has a lot of young guys, teams aren't moving young guys because the young guys own value contractually. And the Magic, there are some tradable contracts there. You do have Kentavious Caldwell Pope, 21.6 next year. Jonathan Isaac, 15 million. I could see like Isaac, KCP, Mo Wagner makes 11 million. It's a team option. Say they pick it up, add it on to a deal. Cole Anthony, 13 million. Wendell Carter, 10.8 million. The thing about the Magic is we look at their rotation. We shouldn't look at it as a tangible rotation. They could really switch everything up with their rosters, seeing how many tradable contracts they have. I mean, think they have one, two, three, four, five players: Isaac, Anthony, Wagner, Carter, and Batadze, who in my mind, even going down to Gary Harris at 7.5 million, I think all of those guys are on the table in a deal for any team this summer. As for everybody else, Wagner, Suggs, Boncaro, they're going to stick around. You would think Anthony Black sticks around. He could be dealt in a deal for, I think, a younger player, maybe not Jrue Holiday, but a younger player who's a little bit better, I shouldn't say better, but established. And then the rest, bunch of young guys: Jet Howard, Tristan Da Silva, you have Caleb Houston, Corey Joseph would be a throw-in. But I think the Magic. I think we should highlight the Magic certainly as a destination for Jrue Holiday, just because of how many tradable contracts they have. And I want to make this point clear with the Magic too: is they could trade their tradable contracts elsewhere and create a situation for themselves where they might need a player like Jrue Holiday, and he fits them a little better in the future after subsequent moves from their roster. So I think the Magic, certainly a destination for Jrue Holiday. The Miami Heat, I think the Miami Heat could also be a destination as well. A lot of tradable deals in Miami. Just pulling up their salary sheet here as they've escaped my screen. But Miami, a lot of tradable deals for the Miami Heat, and they're in a spot right now that it's like, what is their actual direction? Where are they trying to go? Are they going to try to add on to the roster? Holiday doesn't make a ton of sense for Miami because Holiday seems like that final piece, that connector, that glue piece. I don't know what he's gluing together in Miami. Just a bunch of shattered pieces. I don't understand what the exact direction of the Miami Heat is. That'll be a huge question. That's a huge question this summer, and it'll be answered with whatever Miami does. But you have Terry Rozier, 26.6. Andrew Wiggins, 28 million. You have Duncan Robinson, 19.8 million or 19.9 million. Kyle Anderson, 9.2. Then you have Hayward, Highsmith, Jovic, Khalil Ware, likely not moved, but Kevin Love, Jaquez, Pell Larson, and Keyshawn Johnson. All those guys are making under $6 million. So any of those guys could be moved. The young guys likely not, like Khalil Ware, Jaquez, Jovic, probably not moved for the Heat. But anybody else could be on the table. So I could see the Heat as a destination. Just it wouldn't make much tangible sense for the Heat to do that. It would make some sense maybe for the Celtics to get assets back from the Heat, the tradable contracts and maybe some picks. You never know. But the Heat doesn't make a ton of sense. The Hawks are a team that the direction could go anywhere this summer. Again, another team with a lot of tradable contracts. I would say the Magic, Heat, Hawks, they're all up in the air for a Jrue Holiday trade just because of the assets they own and I would say specifically within the Heat and Hawks organization, the lack of direction there. Same thing with the Bulls, lack of direction. Maybe you could, and I'll actually bring this up: the Bulls, the Nets, the Hornets, the Wizards, and the Jazz. Okay, so the Bulls, the Nets, the Hornets, the Wizards, and the Jazz. Those are all teams I could see potentially trading for Jrue Holiday in a salary dump move. I don't think that's where Jrue Holiday lands because
I don't think he's a salary dump yet.
right. It's like I don't. He's a valuable player. I don't think a team is going to trade for Jrue Holiday just in a salary dump swap, and the Celtics probably aren't getting a ton back in that deal, and team's going to be on the hook 37 million 3 seasons from now. I don't necessarily see that, but I'm saying there's potential for the Bulls, the Nets, the Hornets, the Wizards, and the Jazz to be those salary dump teams for any player. We're going to talk about Porzingis in a couple of days from now, but that they're going to come up when it comes. Those teams are going to come up in the conversation for Porzingis. So you definitely had the Bulls on there. The Raptors are in a weird spot because they have some tradable contracts on their roster, most specifically R.J. Barrett, Jakob Pertl. Their direction, I think they're going to run the team they have right now next year. They could get a little frisky this summer, but looking at the team they have now, the money in which they have paid to guys in the future, Barnes, Ingram, quickly, all above 30 million. RJ Barrett, 27.7, Jakob Pertl, 19.5. Jakob Pertl and Barrett are the two guys you're looking at for maybe Jrue. Everybody else makes 7 million or less for the Toronto Raptors. I don't like nobody else on the roster. Abaji, Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter, AJ Lawson, Colin Castleton, Mogbo Shed, Jamal Shed, my guy from Houston, and Jamison Battle. The Raptors. They're very top heavy. They're the top of their salaries. Barnes, Ingram, quickly, even Barrett. They make a lot of money. They all make over $25 million. The rest of their roster, you have Pirtle at that little interchangeable salary, good tradable salary. Everybody else under $7 million. I don't see the Raptors really getting it done for Jrue Holiday. Personnel-wise, maybe you look at it for the Raptors. They could use some guard depth there. You could look at it. Maybe there's an RJ Barrett scenario. Who knows? I'm just throwing it out there. Could be an RJ Barrett. There could be an RJ Barrett deal that goes down, but I think the Raptors receiving RJ Barrett for OG Anunoby, they likely want to see that work out, and I think they want to see this team together next season because it's not a bad team. It's a wonky team, but it's not a bad team. It's an expensive team. I'm sure they're gonna want to finish above the 11th seed next year. I'll say that for the Raptors. The Nets are the bottom teams. The Nets, Hornets, Wizards, salary dump locations. 76ers, they are a team in which you already mentioned it, Maxey, McCain. There's just a lot of the Embiid, Paul George contracts just pretty much impede any type of frisky move from the Sixers. It's just not happening. As for the West, Thunder, Rockets, Spurs could get themselves involved in any deal they wanted out there. Just we talked a lot about them. The Lakers could certainly get involved for Jrue Holiday, Rui Hachimura, Jared Vanderbilt, guys like that on their roster. They could look to move. We mentioned earlier Gabe Vincent, Kleba. There's some tradable contracts there for the Lakers. It's just the Lakers don't have too many assets and they don't have too much room to move. As for the rest of the West, the Nuggets, nope, we already talked about them. Just not enough movable pieces. You have the top half of the roster expensive, the bottom half not very expensive. A lot of young guys, probably not moving for Jrue Holiday. Would have to be a Michael Porter Jr. type. I don't really see that happening because the Celtics would then be adding money under that scenario. Clippers, we talked about a lot later, or not later. Earlier we talked about the Clippers a lot. Timberwolves could be a team that gets frisky, but their guard rotation is pretty jammed, especially knowing Rob Dillingham is coming up within that rotation in the next couple of years. Their young guy they traded up for last year in the draft. I think Rob Dillingham, that definitely makes a difference there. The Warriors, they again, another top heavy team, not a ton of tradable contracts there, and their tradable contracts are rather important rotation pieces for them because like if you trade Jrue Holiday for say Pajimski and Looney and whoever else, right? It's like your rotation is just becoming ever more short because you traded a bunch of assets away for Jimmy Butler and not important assets, but you made your rotation shorter if you're Golden State. I don't think they're going to have. I don't think they have the room to do that again. If they're going to go out and get Jrue Holiday. Memphis already talked about them. Kings already talked about them. Mavericks already talked about them. Suns already talked about them. The Blazers could get a little bit frisky. And let's mention the bottom half. Spurs and Jazz, already mentioned both of those teams earlier. The Blazers, the final two teams on my radar are the Blazers and the Pelicans. The Pelicans are really in a spot of I don't know what the Pelicans are like. The Pelicans, I'm sorry, they're the most no GM wants that job. Absolutely no GM wants the Pelicans job right now. It's the hardest situation to deal with as a GM. You just don't have a lot of outs. You don't have a lot of deals you like because the movable deals on the Pelicans roster, it's going to be they want to try to probably get rid of 30.7 worth of McCollum. Murray's not movable, coming off a torn Achilles, owed a lot of money in the future. 31.6 next year, 33.6 in the future, 31.6 3 seasons from now. But you have Zion at the top of the roster. Maybe they look to move Zion. Who knows? Probably not in a Jrue Holiday deal. DeJounte Murray probably not on the move because that Achilles and the future money. McCollum, I would see the Pelicans wanting to move. I don't. Maybe there's a Jrue Holiday scenario in there. I don't see why the Celtics would do that and cut only $2 million. I really don't.
No one would walk away from that a winner.
That makes no sense. Trey Murphy, I think they want to keep around. They just extended him, and I think he's a very, 24 years old, very talented player. Could be somebody that really produces for them in the future. Could become a future All-Star. Who knows? But those are okay. The top 3 contracts there. It's like those are going to be hard to move. Even the McCollum one that's expiring at 30.7. The rest are tradable deals. But I don't think the Pelicans want to trade these guys. I don't think they want to trade Trey Murphy. I don't think they want to trade Herbert Jones. I don't think they want to trade Jordan Hawkins. The one player you could look at is Kelly Olynyk. Sure, but then what are you adding on to Kelly Olynyk to make this deal work? I just don't see it. Alvarado, Missy, I don't think they want to trade those guys. Elfrid Payton, Brandon Boston, Matkovic, Antonio Reeves, they're all throw-ins at the end. So the Pelicans, maybe they get a little frisky. I would want to trade Murphy or Herb Jones in a Jrue Holiday deal, but I don't know if the Pelicans would be for giving up those kind of assets for a return of Jrue Holiday, especially when you're not really rowing in a particular direction if you're the New Orleans Pelicans. But I think I started to talk about the Blazers before the Pelicans here. I did. The Blazers could get it. It could be interesting. Anthony Simons, $27.6 million next season on an expiring, likely to make an extension afterwards. Who knows with him?
You need to throw in the entire Celtics.
You'd need Avdia. You'd need Williams. Maybe Thibault. I think there's a scenario on the table with the Blazers, but a lot of young guys for an old guy doesn't really make a ton of sense for the Blazers. They're more in the youth movement of the NBA. It doesn't really make sense why they'd be wanting to add a 35-year-old in Jrue Holiday. So probably count them out, although there are some tradable deals there. So that's just running through the whole league. I think the market is pretty clear for Jrue Holiday with the 3 teams at the top. And then everybody else, there's kind of, it's like, maybe. You could see this team getting a little frisky, subsequent moves, some simultaneous moves elsewhere. And maybe teams get frisky out there. You never know. But that sort of rounds up our conversation about Jrue Holiday destinations. However, what we do know at this point in time, we don't know the exact destination of Jrue Holiday moving forward. However, it's speculated that Jrue Holiday will, in fact, be on the move going ahead for the Boston Celtics, as we see these reports coming in here the last couple of days. The Celtics are willing to listen to trade offers for Jaylen Brown and Derek White per Shams Charania. And this is about Derek White and Jaylen Brown primarily. However, this might actually not mention Jrue Holiday.
No, it doesn't.
It does. No, this one does. Wait a minute. We're having some technical difficulties over here. Here we go. This one does.
Okay.
This is the one. Boston's reportedly
I was going to
focused
yell
on.
at you, be like, save that one for another live.
No, we already did it on the Celtics Nation Rise podcast earlier, but I thought that one mentioned Jrue Holiday. He kind of mentioned this is also from Shams here. Is reportedly focused on trades involving Jrue Holiday, Kristaps Porzingis, and Sam Hauser. And then we were using this yesterday for the Jaylen Brown and Derek White takes out there. And even this one, anybody is on the table. From Chris Mannix, most recently, I've heard they're open to trading anybody except for Tatum, the Celtics, and that would definitely include Mr. Jrue Holiday. This is also from Chris Mannix right here. Which players could be available if the Celtics are looking to shed salary? And this is what Chris Mannix had to say. Hauser, to me, is the most likely candidate to go just because you have Baylor Shireman to effectively fill his role next season. Mannix stated here. I think they'd love to find a home for Jrue Holiday as well, just because of the contract and where they are as a team. And the rest is Porzingis and just goes into a bunch of detail on a bunch of items we already talked about with the Celtics.
We won't dive into the other players who are involved in those trade conversations will give you guys a reason to come back to us.
Oh yes, and we will definitely have a lot more talk on
Yeah.
these Jrue Holiday rumors, and I'm sure there's going to be more that come out in the
Definitely.
future when it comes to Jrue Holiday. But I do want to mention here at the end of this live as we're getting ready to wrap up, the reasons um, the Celtics are going to trade Jrue Holiday. I mean, he signed a 4-year, $135 million extension with the Celtics on April 10th, 2024, right before the playoff run last year, where the Celtics won the title. The Celtics definitely took a risk there, inking Jrue to a future deal without it. I mean, the Celtics handed out the Jrue extension. They handed out the Jrue extension without winning the title. So right now it looks great. It's like, oh, we won the title. It's totally fine. If we're in cap purgatory for the future, well, we won the championship.
Yep.
They gave him that deal. Jrue inked that deal before the Celtics won the championship. They were 2 months away at this point, but April 10th, 2024, before the 2024 NBA playoffs. However, since that point, Jrue Holiday has regressed in multiple categories, offensively and defensively. We went over the numbers earlier. The most stark one was a 7.7% drop in 3-point percentage from 24 to 25. That was the most stark contrast. But Jrue's dropped in points per game and rebounds per game and assists per game, field goal percentage, blocks per game, everything. He's regressed in multiple categories. Was not effective in the Knicks series versus Brunson as thought to be. Just wasn't as effective. Defense was not as effective in that series as it was thought to be, and that's something that people aren't really talking about. It's being glossed over, but he wasn't necessarily a massive part of that Knicks series. And while the Celtics were going down, and he was very much a part of the cast of characters who just shot terribly in Game 6, and which resulted in a near 40-point loss for the Celtics. And it's like, oh, one of the Celtics role players aren't playing well tonight. Jrue Holiday was certainly in that corral of players. Offensively, Jrue was very streaky in the playoffs and regular season this past year. Hit less open shots, created less low post around the bucket opportunities, rebounded less. Not as an effective as a driver and finisher as the past, as we've seen in the past. He was always looking to pass this season as well. Not really always looking for a shot, always looking to pass. Not the worst trade in the world, but somebody that I felt like when he had the ball just wasn't always confident with it, even though he's a veteran and even though he's a multi-time gold medalist and NBA champion, still didn't always look comfortable with the ball. And Holiday, he was more injury prone throughout the 24-25 season than he was previously, say in 23-24 or during any of his time with Milwaukee. Wasn't as present offensively as we already went over. It's possible, though, knowing all of this information, the Celtics maybe, just maybe, hold on to Jrue Holiday. Hold up here. Let's see. So yeah, Jrue Holiday. I mean, these are all the reasons in which the Celtics, will go ahead, and we talked about it at the beginning, but there's so many reasons as to why the Celtics would trade Jrue Holiday. However, there is a scenario out there that the Celtics maybe look to keep Jrue Holiday, and the reason why Jrue is still a valuable player, still a valuable defensive player. The Celtics own no obligation to dip under the apron or tax line until the trade deadline, or in general. I've mentioned it several times. This ownership group, led by Bill Chisholm, they could be looking to spend like crazy without Tatum. Who knows? We think that's not the case, but you never know with new ownership what they're willing to do out there. And maybe that's something that becomes evident over time, is the Celtics just don't care about the luxury tax bill going into the future. Celtics own no obligation to dip under the tax at all, just period. But I will say this too. They don't have any obligation if they did want to cut some of that luxury tax money. They don't have any obligation to dip under that line until the trade deadline. That's when things become more final. Well, it doesn't become finalized at the trade deadline, but you're basically finalizing your roster at the trade deadline because there aren't many moves you can make afterwards. And if if you're housing a player like Jrue Holiday, there's no getting rid of him. So you're basically finalizing that at the trade deadline. So the Celtics do have until the trade deadline to figure out their salary situation, and maybe Jrue Holiday stays on the roster from that standpoint. And I'll bring this up too. The Celtics could make other money alleviating moves. They could trade Porzingis. They could trade Hauser. They could alleviate themselves $40 million elsewhere and still keep Jrue on the roster, not cave into any of the deals. But that's also a question with me is, will teams want to sign up for $37.2 million of Jrue Holiday in 27-28, knowing Holiday already showed signs of regression before his age 35 seasons? Before his age 35 season. Will teams, though, talk themselves into Jrue Holiday? Holiday, he is the most. If you look at the trio, right? And Rob mentioned this all the way at the beginning. Hauser, Porzingis, Holiday. Who's the most effective player out of those three right now? Who's the most valuable player? It's Jrue Holiday. So that's certainly something teams, all right, the Celtics and both teams abroad could talk themselves into. Will the Celtics at the end of this settle for selling Jrue Holiday, or will a team actually cave, and will the Celtics actually receive value in return for Jrue Holiday? And it's possible Jrue may own real value on the trade market this summer, and we talked about it earlier. If he owns
The
real
West
value
is
this
too
summer, he
deep.
might not next summer.
Yep, the West is too deep this summer for Jrue to leave for free. That's like my final consensus. I think that the amount of competition out west, obviously, if you look over to the east, I think teams on the East Conference, if they're not selling, they're building, not trying to bring in major acquisitions. I don't see any like major players. Obviously, there will be some significant uh transactions that happen in the Eastern Conference, but I don't see any ground shaking, any core players moving over to the Eastern Conference.
I don't know if it's me. Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I have to keep live going right now, walking out into the abyss.
Oh,
We'll find out here. We're about to
yeah.
find. Oh, I think it might be
I, I,
me.
I I think it is you.
It might be me.
It is.
I think it's me.
It is. Oh, all right. Well, he's gonna be popping right back in here. But looking over at the Western Conference, just not too many teams that I can see really not being in a position where they can bring in a player of that caliber.
Um.
You're back. You're just very
Uh-oh.
grainy. Very grainy. I can. All right. Well, to sign off on this, if Jrue Holiday or if Jason Tatum never got injured during Game 4 of the NBA Finals this year, I would see a world where keeping Jrue Holiday on this team is a very viable option. And all right, you're back.
Yeah, I thought. Did you hear me the whole time? I
Yes,
was like, I don't know if it's me
you
or
were,
him. I have no
no,
idea.
you were crystal clear for me the entire time while you were like, "Oh no, I'm having a." You're like, "I'm having Wi-Fi issues. I'm having Wi-Fi issues," and I'm like watching you have Wi-Fi issues. I'm like, "No, you're not."
No, I'm sitting here like I can't see your face. I can
Yeah,
see your face on the iPad, and I was like, I'm pretty sure it might be a me thing. But regardless,
but yeah, I was
we're
just
back.
giving my final thoughts of if Jason Tatum was wasn't injured, I see a reality where running it back with this roster is a very realistic and tangible idea. I think that going into next year with the same starting lineup, if they were all healthy, isn't too much of a risk. Obviously, you could consider moving one of those players for more depth, but I think from what you've seen, potential wise from this team when they're fully healthy, I mean, this was a roster that was supposed to three-peat. So, and the thing that we always bring up is what Pritchard said was dynasties. It's very hard to win back to back in the NBA, but so I saw this team having a 3 to 4 year window together. But this Jason Tatum injury really shuts off and makes a hiatus during the junior year of this team, which makes it very hard to see them continue to move forward with that same roster and being able to rely on Jrue and Kristaps Porzingis to become those guys that you can count on to give you 17, 20 points per game, and also give you a reliable 30 to 35 minutes per game as well for 82 games plus a postseason. I just don't see that being the most feasible option for the Celtics moving forward. But if Jrue, if there was a player that could make an argument to stick around, it would be Jrue Holiday, just because of how solid of a player he is. He could still contribute for the Celtics team, and as I said at the beginning of the show, I still think this team as it sits, even with Horford and Fournette walking out the door, I still think they're a middle of the pack team in the East, and wouldn't be in too rough of a position if Holiday stuck around, because who knows, maybe you can see that offense start to flow again, but just the defensive consistency is never something that is a negative to have on your team.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking a lot more about Jrue Holiday as we move forward here. And we talked about him for 3 hours today, but the reality is we may get a notification over the next couple of weeks that send us right back here to the live talking all about Jrue Holiday. And Jrue Holiday is certainly one of the more interesting names, not only within the Celtics organization, but around the league. I mean, he could tip the scales for a lot of teams this summer, including the Boston Celtics, moving ahead into the future. However, that is going to do it for us here today on CTW Live. Talked all things Jrue Holiday today, going ahead into the summer. Very polarizing summer coming up for the Celtics and Jrue Holiday. However,
happy belated, Jrue.
Oh, yes.
We
yes.
have talked about all of your trade locations.
Yeah, happy birthday, June 12th, Jrue Holiday, born into this earth 35 years ago yesterday. So shout out to Jrue Holiday on that happy birthday. However, we had to talk about him in another light today. But great player to have around, I will say. Jrue Holiday, championship ring, that'll never go away.
Forever a Celtic.
Right,
forever
exactly.
A Celtic.
Forever a Celtic. And, well, that's going to do it for us here today on CTW Live. Talked all things Jrue Holiday throughout this afternoon. We'll have more talk for you coming up later in the week. Porzingis, season recap, off-season preview. We have it all lined up for you guys moving ahead into the next week and into the off-season. An exciting off-season for the Celtics. Very polarizing, but very exciting for the Celtics. However, that's going to do it for us here on CTW Live. I am your host, Seamus Zarlingo, alongside of me, Nick Franco. And as I always say, thank you all for watching, and go Celtics.